Special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Gary Lineker has been sidelined from Match of the Day in a row over impartiality.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on the 11th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
These are your top stories this morning, and the BBC has suspended Gary Lineker from Match of the Day after he criticised the government's asylum policies. The programme will air without a studio presenter or pundits at the moment, after its regular commentators said they stand in solidarity with Lineker.
The UK is to fund a new detention centre in France to tackle small boat channel crossings. The Prime Minister and the French President have agreed to a £480 million payout over the next 3 years to help tackle the ongoing crisis.
And later this morning, we're going to be talking to an astronomer about the rise of space junk. Scientists are calling to protect Earth's orbit, or low orbit at least, from the dangers of decommissioned satellites left out in space.
And as ever, you can join in any of our discussions this morning, and we're going to be having a lot of them, aren't we? There's lots to talk about.
So there's we've got loads of time to talk to you, so get in touch.
Yes, let us know. Gary Lineker, have the BBC made the right decision asking him to step back? Let us know. GBnews at gbnews.uk. As we've just been saying, Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day following his row with the BBC over his politicised tweets.
Well, the broadcaster says he won't present the programme until he's reached an agreed and clear position with the corporation over his use of social media.
Well, the announcement was followed by fellow pundits Ian Wright and Alan Shearer saying they also would not appear on Saturday's programme in solidarity with Lineker. OK, let's talk to our very own Aidan McGee, who's here in the studio with us this morning.
Good morning to you both.
What do you reckon to all of this? I mean, is it a storm in a teacup, or is there a valid point here?
It's more than a storm in a teacup. I've never really known anything like this. I mean, this is 60 years this show's been going. It pulls in an audience of between 11 and 15 million on a Saturday night, depending on who's playing. So, I mean, are we seeing an institution become toxic within hours last night? That appears to be what happened from what I was seeing yesterday. We saw, first of all, Lineker being pulled away by the BBC from the duties, then having said earlier in the day that yesterday that he'd be willing to do the show yesterday morning, and then Alan Shearer pulls out, Ian Wright pulls out, so this is pundits gone. Other pundits who may have been asked to fill in, they said they're not going to do it. Jermaine Gina said if he'd been asked, he wouldn't have done it. And then Steve Wilson, the commentator last night, this is different. This is not just the punditry analysis bits between the matches. This is the actual commentators. Steve Wilson from BBC, experienced guy, saying, I don't want to do it. Nobody else is doing it. They're going to have to take the live feed or the world feed commentary. So suddenly the programme's looking a shell of what it was previously. I think it's 60 years it celebrates next year. These rights as well, you have to remember, these are paid for. BBC pays £211 million over 3 seasons. The Premier League aren't going to be happy about this. There are rumours as well. It's only rumours at the moment, but last night it was surfacing that players may not talk to Match of the Day today in the 3 o'clock kickoffs or even the early evening kickoffs. Managers may not talk. It could go that far, and I think this could go further and further. I don't know how many agents and advisors and PRs will be saying to their clients, look, if you get offered to do Match of the Day, remember, don't do it right now. And you're seeing the fall from grace of a huge programme, one of the jewels in the BBC's crown. In terms of what happens to Gary Lineker, full disclosure, I used to write his column for the News of the World from time to time back in 2010-11. Good guy, really good guy. I know his son as well. I was very surprised that he would get embroiled in this because he never used to be interested in politics up until 5-6 years ago. My worry for him is that nobody ever talks about his football career anymore. He was a magnificent England player, magnificent. 10 goals in 2 World Cups. He scored key goals, big goals as well, not goals against Panama in warm-up games. He scored against West Germany in the semi-final. Nobody talks about his career anymore, and I wonder if he's damaging his legacy from this. I think it was a calculated career move 5-6 years ago for him to venture into the sphere of politics. I think somebody was saying to him, listen, Gary, you're knocking on a bit. You can't go on forever. Maybe you need to start tweeting politics. That's the look these days. I honestly think that. It sounds a little bit cynical, but I do think someone's advised him to do that. And when you do that, it's a risk-reward thing. Some people agree with you, but a lot of people don't. And I think that most football fans...
But also, it's not just that he's tweeted about politics a lot, and that in itself breaks the impartiality guidelines that the BBC runs for everybody else who works for the BBC. I mean, this is the thing. He seems to be the exception to the rule.
He is, but
it's the fact that he referred to, comparing what was happening now to Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And that's the problem here.
Yes, it is. It is, absolutely. You could broaden it out and say it's not quite what he meant, but he hasn't really commented on the actual tweet itself, has he? He just said he stands by what he says, and I think sometimes you can force yourself into a position and not let yourself out. Having said that, this is 50-50 in terms of where the PR is right now.
What do you think the BBC make of their decision? Because it is interesting, isn't it, that they kept quiet all week. Nothing was said really by the BBC. And then last night we heard that Gary Lineker had been asked to step back from Match of the Day. It looks as though they'd entered war without a battle.
Well, I think it's a little bit more... Well, from a PR point of view, I think they wanted a holding position, Ellie. We saw TalkSport earlier in the season, and we had it at Sky when Jamie Carragher spat at a fan. They just put him out to graze for a short period of time, edged him back, just like TalkSport did with Trevor Sinclair back last September when he made those inflammatory remarks about the Queen following just hours after her death. If you listen to TalkSport now, he's back. He's come in through the back door. This is much, much bigger than either of those two, and Carragher was big, believe me. But this is different, and I think they were hoping this time yesterday, OK, we don't want to lose Gary Lineker. He's a household name. I do think he's a very good Match of the Day presenter. Yes, he earns a lot of money, but that's the market these days. However, I think they I think that the plan this time yesterday would have been... Because they won't have bargained for the backlash that they got. They won't have bargained on commentators saying downing tools. So I think they wanted a holding position, put him out to graze until the end of the season. It's already March, and then go again maybe in August. I think that's probably what they would have been thinking. They would not have been bargaining for what's happened. Absolutely not.
No, it's interesting.
Do you have any idea of how production staff are feeling? Because, as I understand it, Match of the Day is going to continue. Yeah, but the on-screen talent have said they don't want to be a part of it, but there's the production team there that still have to put things together.
The lower down the food chain you go, and you look at earnings here, it's important. Those commentators can't afford to stay out of work for that long. I think on a one-off basis it's fine. Production staff... Absolutely not. I think they've been in breach of contract, actually. I know a few people. I know somebody works up there. I spoke to him yesterday. He wasn't minded to down tools or anything like that. But but then I suppose somebody who isn't on screen probably wouldn't be under the pressure to make that statement. But I don't. So I think they can do it on a one-off basis. We'll be interested. I'll tell you what's going to be fascinating tonight: the viewing figures, because a lot of people will watch it in defiance to support the BBC and as an anti-Gary Lineker statement, if you like. A lot of people will boycott it. Don't forget, they get between 11 and 12 million. That's what they pay their £211 million over 3 seasons for. Premier League won't be happy about that, by the way, because they want to see the highlights packages. It's not a big money earner for the Premier League, £211 million in the context of everything they get from Sky and the overseas broadcast rights. But it's strategic for them. They like the BBC because they know that it gets watched, their product gets out there, and it's watched by a lot of people. So we'll see what the viewing figures are tonight, and I think we'll see them published quite soon. It'll be fascinating. But I've never known a story like this in my life.
Yeah. OK, Aidan, thanks very much indeed. Well, if you think it's going to be a shell of a programme tonight on Match of the Day, and it looks like it is, to be fair, then I'll tell you what we've got for you. Tune into GB News tonight, 10 o'clock. Okay, you can watch our star-studded alternative Match of the Day with Mark Dolan. Hey, what?
I haven't had a call for that. Unbelievable.
I'm sure you will, Aidan.
You probably will. You probably will. But you can't be on every show, Aidan.
I know.
But it is going to be packed with star guests, with pundits and all the rest of it. So it's a proper football show tonight. So watch that at 10 o'clock instead.
Yeah, something a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. Your views, actually, on the whole Gary Lineker thing. It's interesting because, obviously, what we like here is freedom of speech. The BBC works in a very different way, and the impartiality thing. But so does that mean, should he have freedom of speech on Twitter, or should he actually follow the rules that everybody else within the corporation has to follow? He's the only one, really, who gets away with it. So is it fair?
Emily Maitlis got away with it, did she not? At the top of Newsnight?
No, well,
she was
didn't.
reprimanded,
She was
wasn't she?
reprimanded, and then she's gone, hasn't she? She left not long after. I mean, of her own volition, but she left. So, I mean...
It will be interesting to see what agreement they come to and whether they manage perhaps to make a distinction between the fact that he's not a news journalist, he's a sports journalist.
Key thing here as well, Ellie, we don't know what's in his contract.
Yeah, exactly, that is a key
As is always the way.
Yeah, that's a key thing. Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. This is a story that just keeps on getting bigger, doesn't it? We didn't see this one coming.
Keeps on giving. It is 9 minutes past 6. Let's bring you up to date with what else is going on today.
And junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary did not attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned 3-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors voted to take industrial action over demands for a 35% pay rise.
NHS England says more than 100,000 patients have been treated in virtual wards over the last year, having vital signs monitored remotely. Medical bosses say the scheme has been a game changer, helping patients avoid unnecessary hospital trips and enabling them to be discharged sooner.
The Met Office has issued a warning for snow remaining in place for much of Scotland over the weekend. It comes as the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service also issued an alert about the risk of wildfires. Fire officials say dry winter conditions can create the ideal circumstances for wildfires to spread.
Snow and wildfires for Scotland.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I mean, it's proper. That is proper crazy.
Yeah.
Actually, well, not that there are any wildfires at the moment, but that alert, you wouldn't have thought now was the time of year you had to be particularly aware of it all, would you?
But it creates tinderbox conditions, I wouldn't have thought.
No.
We learn something new every day.
You do. So if you're out and about in Scotland, be very careful.
And be careful if you're driving, especially up in the north of the country, because that snow we've had in the last few days, it's now got a layer of ice on top. So there is a warning today about driving in the north. So do be careful out on those roads.
The problem is where I live, sort of South Midlands, it was -3 this morning.
Was it really?
And you just think, it's that layer of ice now which causes a lot of the problems.
That's the problem, isn't it? So do be careful if you're out and about, and put a blanket in your car as well. There were lots of people stuck on the M62 yesterday.
Stay in fact.
Yeah.
That would be
Stay
nice.
in and watch us, why don't you?
Get the telly on, get the kettle on, and away you go. And we'll tell you what you need to know this morning, including that information about the UK helping to fund a detention centre on French soil to try to stop the flow of migrants crossing the UK via the Channel.
Yes, the deal was agreed in Paris yesterday between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and President Emmanuel Macron of France at a summit to tackle the issue.
Now, the UK, we think, is going to pay about £480 million in funding over the next 3 years or so to help fund those measures, which are expected to be fully operational in 2 to 3 years.
Well, to go over that and more, we're joined now by the founder of Youth Vote UK, Alexander Cairns. Good morning to you. Great to have you in the studio with us. So first of all, what did you make of that summit between Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron yesterday? It certainly looked very cosy. We were here live as they stepped into the Elysee Palace yesterday. They were holding each other's backs, lots of back rubs. I mean, it was significant, wasn't it? The first summit in 5 years.
Yeah, it was significant, and it's obviously good to see that they've got a good working relationship. You know, that's very important. France is a key ally for us. I think it was a little bit overdone in terms of, I think, you know, Rishi Sunak, I felt like he always has a kind of camera crew, you know, following everything everything he does all the time, and I think a little bit over the top, but I also understand that it's an important summit. You know, he's got a lot of pressure for this immigration bill. He needs to be working with France. So I understand, but, you know, I think we need a little bit less of the hugging and the kind of, you know, more detail on the policies, yeah.
Well, what more do you need to know at this stage? I mean, look, we're putting in £500 million over a number of years. France is putting money in too. We don't know how much.
Yeah.
And we're going to have, and basically, a detention centre and more patrols and things, but on the other side of the channel. That's all got to help, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but it's an interesting one because obviously we're going to have to wait a few years until it's operational. That's interesting. Why is that? You know, I know that the French obviously have to recruit some more officers for this.
They've got to build it for a kick-off.
And I think what's interesting as well is obviously, you know, working with France is important, but actually the whole, you know, approach to this I think is wrong. And actually you're seeing a lot of people that aren't necessarily satisfied because I think what Rishi Sunak is trying to do is anything that's a difficult issue he wants to address. And we saw that with Brexit, which is absolutely the right thing. But I think he assumes that because he got, you know, a win with the European Union on Brexit, that somehow working with the French government, this will be a silver bullet, there'll be a detention centre, more officers kind of on the French beach, and that would, you know, stop everything. And I don't think it's that simple, as we've seen, you know, historically, to be honest.
Did the pair seem on equal footing to you both yesterday? Because Stephen's just mentioned there, we know that we will be contributing £500 million to this detention centre in the next few years. We don't have numbers from the French, and there was also a difference in rhetoric yesterday. Rishi Sunak said he was very fortunate to be serving alongside Macron, but Macron said he wants to have the best possible relations, but the UK need to fix the consequences of Brexit. What do you think he meant by that?
Yeah, and I think this is the reality. I think we are going to the French trying to kind of plead with a political issue that we have. Obviously, they have a different perspective on this, right? So I don't think it's an equal footing. I don't think it's an equal relationship at all. And I think that's an issue for us because it means the French government have leverage. I think it's very interesting that we haven't found out how much they're paying, which probably indicates that it's probably not that much, and we're going to fund a lot of the bill. And I don't think British taxpayers are going to like that because I think this is a joint issue between France and the United Kingdom. But
Hold on. Why is it a joint issue between... I mean, because as far as France is concerned, they're not going to be at all concerned, are they? I mean, realistically, as we wouldn't be the other way. If there were people getting on boats from the UK and heading to France and leaving our country, we wouldn't be bothered, would we? So...
No, I see that point, but I think it's a joint issue in the sense of I think the French people in the north, obviously, you know, there's a lot of, you know, migrants that are trying to, you know, come into the United Kingdom. There's a lot of these kind of camps where the French people aren't too happy. So it's still a political issue as much as Macron tries to play it down. I think, you know, from some of the context I have in France, people are still very concerned about, especially in the Calais parts, that there's a little bit of an issue there and they want to get it sorted with the UK government.
What about the bill, then, was put before the House this week? There is concern, well, it can't work until there's a return agreement, somewhere to actually send people. But the idea, I mean, it's got the backing. Our GBNews People's poll yesterday, 52% of people backed that plan. I mean, something has to be done. I mean, is there a general acknowledgement of that?
I mean, so it's an interesting one because I think it really depends who you ask. I actually would say that overwhelmingly when we poll young people, they actually don't support the bill. And I think the reason they don't is if you think about, you know, the refugees and asylum seekers and migrants that are trying to get a better life for themselves or fleeing war zone countries, they don't support the fact that if you think about, you know, the policy, you know, going to Rwanda, if you are leaving a developing country and coming to the UK or Europe, you don't really want to be going to Rwanda, right? So I think the policy really should be working with European countries and understanding how can we fairly look at, you know, placements in European countries. Going to Rwanda isn't probably the right thing for those people that are leaving developing countries.
No, but the idea that if you try to come here illegally, then you are just back out and you will never get leave to remain.
But I think it's the definition of how they're coming here illegally. I think there's a backlog. I think I haven't got a real clarity position on what's going to be a legal versus illegal passage. Again, it depends who you ask. And I think if people are desperate and they don't have the right channels to get to the UK, absolutely, of course, they're going to try and come here illegally. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be allowed a fair kind of hearing as to why they should be given asylum or refuge in the United Kingdom. I think, again, that definition needs to be a little bit more clearer.
OK. Alexander, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, ahead of the spring budget on Wednesday, we've had a pretty good scoop here at GB News because the Chancellor has spoken to Esther and Phil on his plans to deliver growth and tackle inflation. Have a listen.
It's not what I want at all, but by the way, Liz Truss was right to say that the central question is how we deliver growth. Where I think the mini-budget was wrong was to say you can borrow to cut taxes, because that's not sustainable. That's not money that you've actually got, that's money you're borrowing. And so if we're going to cut taxes permanently, then it needs to be a tax cut that we earn through higher growth. And the first step is stability. And for stability, you need responsible public finances. And that's why we took some very difficult decisions. We did increase taxes. We actually cut spending by more than we increased taxes in the autumn statement. So it was a very, very difficult statement. What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
Yeah, so he wants to do it. Now, I tell you what I find interesting about that is still sticking to those principles. Well, I want to bring down business taxes. I want to bring down personal taxes. Hooray! I mean, wouldn't that be lovely? But the fact he's saying I can't do it now. Now, is that frustrating or is it responsible economics?
Yeah.
Which side of the fence do you sit on that? I mean, it'd be lovely to have all the tax cuts now, but then what sort of pickle would that leave us in? So I don't know. Or would it help grow the economy, as was Liz Truss's idea? You know, you slash all the taxes and all the rest of it, and it will help grow the economy.
Well, his hands,
I don't know.
Then are his hands tied? Because Liz Truss did exactly the opposite, and it didn't go down too well.
No, it didn't go down well with the market.
Perhaps then that means there's only one way to handle this next budget.
Maybe.
And he's saying that what he'd like to do and what he is going to do perhaps will be at odds with one another.
Which means if we settle the ship now, does that mean we'll get all that in handy time for the next election?
Yeah.
Loads of tax cuts. I mean, I just don't know.
That makes sense, yes.
But it would make sort of political sense. Does it make economic sense? What do you think? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Anyway, that was just a clip. You can watch the full video on Esther's and Phil's programme, 10 o'clock this morning, and we'll talk to them about that interview just after 9.
Yep, lots more to come on the programme, including the latest weather warning from the Met Office.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The time has just gone 23 minutes past 6. You're watching Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie. I was about to say on Stephen and Ellie.
On
with
Stephen and Ellie?
Ellie.
That would be messy.
That would, yes.
Anyway, coming up on the programme this morning, we're getting the latest on the Six Nations before England play France. Later on this afternoon, we'll talk to former England rugby international Tom Van Dale. That's at 8:20.
And at 9:20, we'll be speaking to actress Sue Holderness about her work to tackle fraud among over 65s. You might recognise her as Marley from Only Fools and Horses.
A legend.
Very excited about that, aren't we?
Yeah, though she's been stung by fraud, online fraud, so she doesn't want people to get stung as well. So it'd be really interesting to talk to her and to find out what you need to do to protect yourselves. Get in touch all the usual ways, of course. Best one, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't know why, is GBViews at gbnews.uk, because it's the one that's easier to say. You can tweet us as well if you want, at GBNews. Getting all husky this morning.
I was about to say, I really like the husky. Husky voice, yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely.
There you go. It's early. It's only 24 minutes past 6. There you go. Now, there are currently 70 flood alerts in place across the UK, the Midlands and the South all being warned. Scotland, believe it or not, now has a wildfire warning.
Yes, it's after the country was battered with heavy snow and blizzards earlier this week, with some areas seeing around 40 centimetres of snow and temperatures dropping as low as -17.
Well, let's talk to meteorologist John Hammond, who joins us now. What's going on, John?
What a mess, Stephen. What a mess. We're in the middle of March. It's a meteorological mess. Yes, there's a lot going on. It's cold. You mentioned it's -3, I think, where you were earlier on today in the South Midlands. We were very concerned that it might get down as low as -10 last night across parts of the Midlands, which would have been truly historic. We've actually been saved from those remarkably low temperatures by a shield of clouds. So actually the lowest temperatures that I can see at the moment are across the north of Scotland, where it is -12. But more typically, we're waking up to sort of -3 to -5 degrees. So an icy start just about nationwide. Added into the mix, there are some flurries of snow affecting parts of South Wales and the West Country, so an enhanced risk of some ice here, but just about anywhere. It's going to be treacherous out there with all that snow which fell over the last couple of days, and you're seeing pictures now of the extent of it across the North Midlands, Wales, Northern England, and that snow is only going to slowly thaw through today. It's going to be a cold, cold day, a grey, cold day for many of us today. So typically around about 4, 5, 6 degrees. That's what the temperature is going to be like. Where should we be at this time of year? We should be up at around, 12 degrees, typically in the middle of March. So this cold March continues. Actually, cold months are getting rarer than hen's teeth. It's not very often now we get a colder than average month. But March, I think, if we carry on in this fashion, is going to be a colder than average month. And my charts actually indicate that although there will be some milder interludes over the next few days, really it's a cold theme for the next week or two across much of the UK, and there is the chance of further snowfall. Hopefully not as dramatic as we've had over the last couple of days, but there are chances of snow as we go into next week and possibly beyond. So we're not out of the woods yet, and later on today there will be some fresh snowfall across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, and as that hits the really cold air across Northern England and Scotland, I'm expecting a few more centimetres of snow. So this is later on this evening and into the night. We're not talking 40 centimetres, we're talking probably another 4 or 5 centimetres of snow on top of what's already fallen. So that's one to watch later on tonight. But actually, guys, tomorrow, a transformation. Much warmer air will sweep across the country. So in comparison with the 4 or 5 Celsius that I've been talking about today, tomorrow actually typically 12 or 13 degrees. So quite a rapid thaw through tomorrow. And there'll be some rain which does bring the chance of some flooding, because all that snow that's locked up across the high ground of northern England and Scotland is going to be released into the rivers of northern England, maybe the Midlands as well. So flooding is one to watch through later tonight and into tomorrow.
Yeah, flooding is one to watch, but remarkably in Scotland there's also wildfire warnings. Tell us a bit more about that.
It's news to me as well, to be honest. It's been a dry winter. And so I think there is some concern that if we continue in this dry vein and we get into the spring, and the latest computer models, I have to say, the longer term models are indicating that it will be a dry late spring and into summer, and quite potentially another hot one, then we could be into problem territory with wildfires. But actually that news item that you've told me about, that's news to me. And hopefully all the snow and the rain, which we're going to see over the next few days, will help the situation. But it's of some concern that we have had a very dry winter, and if the computer models are right, we're going to be heading into a dry late spring and summer, and that is one of concern. If the situation if we don't have a prolonged spell of rain, then obviously the fire risk increases.
Yeah, it does indeed. John, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
I tell you what, though, I am quite cheered by John with at least tomorrow. 10 or 12 degrees, I might have a barbecue.
Positively balmy, isn't it?
Might get me shorts
Lovely.
on.
Yeah.
It's
And a hot summer,
warm.
did you hear that?
Hot summer. But isn't it interesting that there is this concern now that we're just not getting enough rain?
No.
And then we were talking in the papers yesterday, weren't we, about how people don't want reservoirs built near them.
No, which I don't understand, because reservoirs can look so beautiful, don't you think?
They can be really lovely, and good wildlife reserves and all the rest of it. But we're going to have to prepare more reservoirs and things. If we've got to, if we're having these sort of water shortages, got to sort that out. So that was in the papers yesterday. We'll find out what's in the papers today in a couple of minutes. And we're also talking about space junk. There's something like 1 trillion pieces of space junk in low Earth orbit, and we're going to have to sort it out.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
6:32 morning to you. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
And let's take a look at today's front pages for you now. And the Daily Express has gone with Rishi Sunak's £478 million deal with France to end the small boats crisis.
The Times has support from fellow presenters who've refused to stand in for Gary Lineker following his suspension from Match of the Day.
Similarly, The Independent questions what Britain is getting. Oh, no, that's not the same story.
It's not at all.
Not at all. We're talking about the Anglo-French summit yesterday, talking about Britain handing France £500 million to solve the small boats crisis.
It's flip-flopping again this morning, aren't we? The Mail is going on Gary Lineker's suspension, claiming one source has described the mutiny as a proper BBC crisis.
So it does seem as though there's two stories in the papers today. So it's time to go through the papers now. And joining us this morning is Cindy Yu, Assistant Editor of The Spectator, and Kevin Schofield, Political Editor of HuffPost. Good morning to you both. Cindy, let's start with you, shall we, and that Anglo-French summit.
Yes, we'll start with the first of the two stories.
Yeah. Yes, let's. And it's that £500 million deal to stop the boats.
Yes, and the Daily Express is reporting that France is expected to pay 5 times that much. So they suspect that the deal is around £3 billion in total. I don't know if that is really to be believed, because that is what the Downing Street line is as well.
So France is paying 5 times...
According to Downing Street. According to Downing Street, it's funny that...
They wouldn't dare say it if it wasn't true,
I think you can maybe do some kind of number tampering about with the kind of money they would already put into border force, policing. Anyway, I don't know the details there. But what I do know is that there'll be this new detention centre, so any migrants found living illegally in Calais or otherwise in France will be taken to the detention centre so that they never cross the channel, and that there'll be 500 more police officers and some UK border force people permanently stationed there. So a lot of new things happening.
Will it work?
Well, there's no returns deal, which is one of the things that the London side was hoping for, so that if anyone does make it across, France is saying we're not taking them back unless you talk to the whole of the EU. So there are massive questions about where the gaps still lie.
A new
This
chapter
detention centre is... I think I've read somewhere it's not due to be up and running until the end of 2026. So, obviously Rishi Sunak has made stopping the boats one of his 5 key promises. The next election's only 18 months away.
We've got to be realistic about that, though, haven't we? In terms of...
But he set himself that deadline.
He did, but if we're building, if we're building a detention centre, it's not going to be ready in a fortnight.
Well, no, it's not. But it's whether voters, accept that argument. We're trying, we're moving towards it, because voters could turn around and say, "Well, hang on a minute, you've been in power for 14 years. Why have you not, got a handle on this long before now?" So I think that's going to be the difficulty for them. They can say, "Well, look, we're making progress." But it's because he set the bar so high with this stop the boats. It's a very clear pledge. He had it on his lectern during the week in Downing Street. It's whether voters are willing to cut them some slack and say, OK, fair enough, the numbers are reducing, but hang on, but you said we'll stop them entirely and then punish them at the election. Who knows, we'll see.
I think they'll be quite happy with this front cover. Day 2, the Daily Express being so positive about it, reporting this line about the French spending much, much more on it. I think in terms of day 2 reaction of what voters and the right-wing press think, I think it has been positive and they'll be congratulating themselves on
All right, so the government's going to be happy with half the front pages. The BBC is not going to be happy with the other half, Ken. Let's have a look at the Times, because it's obviously Lineker's been suspended from Match of the Day, but now everybody else has walked out as well.
Well, yeah, I think it's not quite
all wearing T-shirts saying, "Poor Gary."
Well, it's not quite worked out, I think, how the BBC thought it would. I think as soon as Ian Wright said last night that he was pulling out, no one else could do it, because no one, I think, wanted to be crossing the imaginary picket line, if you want to put it like that. So, yeah, the BBC have managed to turn this into a story about their mishandling, I think, of the situation. Now, it's dominated headlines for the last 3 or 4 days. It felt almost like the air was coming out of the story yesterday until last night, obviously, when the BBC said he was stepping back, although there's a dispute over how voluntary that was. I don't think it was voluntary at all. It looks like basically they've gone to him and said, right, you need to apologise, you need to put out something, basically rowing back on what you said, and he wouldn't do it, and it's come to this. Now, this is obviously one of the most popular programmes on the BBC. Tonight's programme is going to be unrecognisable. There's even talk of
Me and Ellie are doing it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. But, there's talk about some of the managers won't speak to the BBC either after it. I mean, it is unbelievable.
Said he's not going to.
Well, it is unbelievable, really, how this is completely spun out of control. And it's difficult to see how it resolves itself, because it looks like Gary Lineker is digging in. I don't think he's going to apologise, certainly. or retract what he said. That's not going to happen. And the BBC have now, gone up against them. So did they then roll back themselves and climb down?
But how
and
can they? I mean,
space?
just look at Tim Davie, who's DG, right, Director General. So he's the boss. When he got the job, in 2020, he said, I want to crack down on staff posting their views on social media to restore the view of the BBC as impartial. Which is fair enough. If that's the position, then absolutely fair enough. So, but they can't then continue with Gary Lineker being just about the only person who can spout off on whatever he likes and get away with it.
Well, I mean, you've got Lord Sugar, who's done it, and he still presents The Apprentice. I mean, he's been pretty clear in his political views on Twitter. There's never any discussion about whether he should lose that.
So the argument would be that's made by an independent production company and bought in, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think
that's true. I mean, the other argument is that Gary Lineker isn't a news presenter. I mean, it'd be different.
No, but Tim Davie wasn't talking about news presenters. He was talking about BBC staff.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Gary Lineker's not staff, but even so.
But he has also, I'm pretty sure he's tweeted controversial things since 2020, and he's got away with it. So what is it about this one in particular? Is it because they've bowed to the political pressure? Obviously,
it's Nazis. It's the Nazi word.
No, well, he didn't say Nazis, but we know what he was getting at.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, ill-advised.
I don't think it was an edifying tweet
once
for
you
him
go
to
there,
speak out.
I think it's you open yourself up to criticism.
All right, so
without a doubt.
what's the polling between you two then? Should Gary Lineker be stepping down or be pushed like this? Do you think it's a right or wrong decision by the BBC?
It's so difficult. It's so difficult because I think you really do want to crack down on the social media stuff. It is ridiculous people are spouting off on Twitter, not just in the BBC, but just journalists in general. I mean, I think it's a massive problem for our industry. You can see how Lineker is such a massive diva with this. He's paid so much. He's like, well, I don't have to take this stuff from you. And so I think it's so difficult because, as you say, if the boss wants you to shut up on social media...
You shut up on social media.
And if you don't, then there's going to be consequences.
So you're sort of...
I really don't know, because I think they've made this so much worse, right?
I think they've done the wrong thing here. I think they've made it into such a huge issue. I think.
But that wouldn't that leave Gary Lineker as this sort of, well, so you said diva, but sort of untouchable?
I think there might have been a way behind the scenes to have a quiet word and say, look, tone it down a bit going
But I think
forward.
they were trying over the last few days, right? And Gary Lineker wasn't having any of it.
I think it sounds as though, from what we're gathered, that they may have been looking for him to make some kind of public statement, sort of distance himself, retract it or whatever, and I don't think he was ever going to do that. I think there might have been a way of doing it without it coming to such a point. So I think the BBC have mishandled it now, and they certainly didn't anticipate the reaction that there's been, and all the others saying they won't appear either. And now they've got this hugely popular, long-running programme, and it's going to be a shell tonight, and I don't know what's going to happen next week.
Well, you know what you need to do, because it's going to be Match of the Day with no presenter, no pundits and no commentary, so it would seem. So you need to tune into the alternative Match of the Day, 10 o'clock tonight, GB News with Mark Dolan, where we've got pundits, experts, stars, all going to be on the show. So you want to watch that instead? You want to be here instead, definitely. Cindy, let's have a look at the junior doctor strikes, which is in the Telegraph.
Yes, I think it's actually in the Mirror, this particular one. But
wrong list.
yeah. But tens of thousands of patients and medics are going to London today. So, I mean, I think this is the first time that patients are going to be on the streets as well, just to protest underfunding of the NHS. And you've got other people like Adam Kay, who's that very famous author and comedian who used to be a junior doctor, kind of wading in on there. And I think this is part of, we talked about Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, as well as the boats, is also to cut down the waiting list and just to solve these kind of healthcare crises. And healthcare must be the strike that the government's most worried about, because it's the one that's most popularly supported, as we can see from patients literally going onto the streets to support their staff. So I think, once Rishi Sunak comes back from Paris, and I know he's got another summit on Monday, this is something that really can't wait, because this is something that the public does not support the government on, not giving pay rises here.
So why is it then that the Health Secretary didn't meet junior doctors or their representatives yesterday? Because it seems crackers to me.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think Rishi Sunak is desperate to get this dealt with now. I mean, we've gone from Steve Barclay previously saying around about Christmas time saying no pay talks at all. This is the offer, take it or leave it. They've rode back on that a little bit now. They will talk about pay talks, but there's mixed messages coming out. Why not meet them yesterday? Because clearly this is running on and running on, and you're right, Cindy, it's very unpopular. The government, the public love the NHS, and they need to get this resolved. Now, Rishi Sunak has had a decent couple of weeks. The Brexit deal, the announcement, the bromance with Macron yesterday. But this is something else that he needs to get dealt with so they can move on, because this is not good.
No.
Yeah. OK, I want to talk, because we've got to talk about the Duke of York. I mean, poor fella. Poor fella. The King will no longer pay for his Indian healer.
Can you believe that?
I mean, what a rotter.
Who does the King think he is? £32,000 a year, apparently, Prince Andrew pays, well, or we pay, I guess, for an Indian healer. And apparently this has been going on for several years, and the Queen, who we know was very fond of Andrew, signed off on it, no problem at all. It's basically he puts in the bill to the Privy Purse, and it's up to the monarch to decide whether it gets paid or not. Now, it looks like
Privy Purse means we're paying for it.
Well, yeah, exactly. So Charles has come in, and I think it's fair to say that he's cracking the whip here. You know what I mean? It's not just Andrew. Obviously, he's taken Frogmore Cottage off Sussexes as well, and he's basically said, no, hang on a minute, I'm not paying this anymore. So if you want to have your Indian healer, you'll have to pay for it yourself.
What's he getting for 32 grand a year? Do we know?
I think, well, the Sun has a mock-up of Andrew cross-legged, sitting in denim jacket, kind of going arming. But I think that's probably just a little part of what he does.
Chanting, massages and holistic therapy.
Oh. Wow.
I mean, look, Andrew, you get it off. I'll do it for you for 15 grand. I mean, what? It's more than most people earn in a year.
Utterly insane.
Then
this is Air Miles Andy, isn't it? I mean, he's famously, quite fond of the perks of being a royal. So this
I don't think he even realises the perk of being a royal. For him, it's probably just normal. I don't even think he realises how
he's always lived this life, hasn't he? Yeah.
And I think, in the story, the fact that the Queen was paying for it all these years is the most fascinating thing to me. I mean, we love the Queen for good reason, but clearly on Andrew, she has such a soft spot. Such a soft spot, too soft a spot, some might say. And, it's good to see that Charles is, thinking about the cost of living crisis and not letting this go.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a new era, isn't it? Clutching at the purse strings.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're also saying here, he's set to have his £249,000 a year grant. That's what Andrew gets. He's going to get that slashed. They're talking about him having to move out of the residence that he's got as well, him and Fergie. So yeah, as I say, Charles has come in and he's decided it's a new broom. This is how it's going to be done from now on, and he's not taking any nonsense. No.
Do you think this is going to garner respect? I mean, because I think the way that Charles is handling himself as king and some of the crackdowns he's doing, I know there's a slimmer monarchy and all the rest of it that he's aiming towards, but actually this is going to get a lot of applause, isn't it?
Yeah.
People say, well, actually, this money, we didn't know it was being spent, but this is wasteful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Charles probably has some personal reasons as well, because he and his brother's relationship have been pretty bad since the whole Jeffrey Epstein stuff. But I think Charles is mindful that he is not as popular as the Queen. He has to kind of live up to her legacy. And to do that, he has to be mindful of the ways he's acting and not just take it for granted. And so I think this is a great thing. I mean, but although we wouldn't have known about it had he not said no. So it really kind of raises the question of how else are they living?
Well, you do wonder.
What else
are
they spending? Yeah, it does raise that question.
You do wonder. You got any thoughts on that? If you are an Indian healer or used one,
are you cheaper than £32,000? Yeah.
I wonder how often he saw him for that. Once a week?
Many people are cheaper than £32,000.
Well, yeah.
I just can't quite get my head around that.
Bonkers, isn't it? The lifestyle he must have led. I mean, in that wonderful 50 bedrooms, that residence on the Windsor estate.
Well, you can't manage with less, can you?
You need somewhere for staff, Ellie.
Must be a nightmare to heat, though.
Oh, yeah.
Think of those energy bills.
That probably comes out of the Privy Purse.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, yeah.
You're going to have to worry about it. OK, if you've got any thoughts on that, gbnews.uk, I'm sure you do. Cindy, Kevin, thank you both very much indeed. We'll catch up with you two a little bit later on.
Now, scientists are calling for a collective effort to protect Earth's orbit from becoming clogged with debris and decommissioned satellites.
Yeah, do you know what? It's tiny bits of debris.
Is it?
Yeah, there's
He's the space geek, you know.
I love my space geek. There's about 37,000 bits of debris that are about up to 10 centimetres long, or to about 10 centimetres long.
Which is
But the other bits it's like flecks of paint.
Wow.
They're tiny, tiny bits. There's about 130 million of them. But they're travelling at something like 4 miles a second in low Earth orbit. So that's what the shuttle was doing. It used to do 4 miles a second. So they could be really fast. So that can cause devastating damage, these tiny little bits. So it's really, really problematic. Experts are warning that humans are polluting the skies in a similar way to the seas and land, adding that we must learn the lessons from our own history and act now.
Well, we're joined now by astronomer Mark Thompson for more on this. Good morning to you, Mark. Brilliant to have you with us. So for people who are watching and listening this morning, first of all, what is space junk?
Well, you know, just as we were talking about, the problem is all the bits of debris from flecks of paint that might have fallen off spacecraft, off satellites in orbit around the Earth. There are bits of bolts and nuts that are flying around. Sometimes they're there because they've been caused by some kind of impact or collision, where satellites that are not used anymore are in uncontrolled orbits, and they just they'll bump into each other, and it happens on occasions. And there's debris from those collisions. So there's bits of debris like that, and there's bits of paint that have just fallen off satellites. There's even a toolbox floating around that fell off. Not fell off. It drifted away from one of the space shuttle missions. So there's a whole host of bits and pieces floating around, and if we don't get control of it, then ultimately we could be cut off from space.
Right. So how do we get control of it? Because why isn't this stuff slowing down and falling into the atmosphere and burning up?
It does. You know, that's the good thing, is that bits of it do slow down in their orbit. And of course, if you don't accelerate and provide power to anything in orbit around the Earth, then it does slow down by atmospheric drag, where the resistance of the atmosphere will slow it down and eventually it will burn up. But there's more up there, and there's more being produced. And there's this concept called the Kessler syndrome that essentially says the more debris you have, then the more debris is being produced, because it generates more collisions. But quite how you stop it and clear it up is difficult. The larger pieces you can track and collect. Spacecraft up in orbit, the space station, could certainly start a sort of garbage run, if you like, and start collecting and bringing down safely some of those bits of debris. But the danger really is the smaller bits, the bits of paint, the tiny little bits of debris that you can't quite track and you can't see where it is. And capturing that is very difficult. Now, there are concepts such as, these are only concepts at the moment, putting up their large nets or large inflatable balloons, for want of a better description, that are sticky, that these things could attach to. But at the moment, there's no really credible way of getting rid of the smaller pieces of debris.
It truly is fascinating. There's experts this morning who are saying there needs to be a legally binding global treaty. That's the only way they say that this is going to be tackled. What do you make of that? How would that work?
Yeah, I'd quite agree. There's got to be responsibility, and if there's the big problem is satellites in orbit around the Earth that are just left and not brought back to Earth safely. So they will eventually deorbit. They will eventually slow down, as I've spoken about, with atmospheric drag and fall to the Earth. But there's a danger there, because if these satellites are drifting around uncontrolled, and they eventually will fall through the atmosphere, if they're large enough, they'll hit the surface of the land. Many of them get destroyed, generating a bit more debris. But some of them will land quite often over the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. But there's always a danger that they could land over land, over inhabited areas of the world. So there's got to be responsibility, and it's really important that international organisations and companies take control of the debris that gets produced.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so difficult to see how it comes to. I mean, when it comes to the bigger stuff, right? Can we not set things up so that when they come to an end of their lifetime, they jettison off out towards the sun or something?
There's cost associated with that. So certainly, as long as there's fuel, yes, you could do that. But there's probably a moral question of, should we just make the problem get put somewhere else in space? Because certainly space is a big place, and there's lots of it. But should we just throw our debris? It's like it feels a bit like throwing our debris into the ocean and just letting something else deal with it. But of course, if it goes to the sun, it's going to get destroyed. But I just think we need to control it ourselves here on Earth. We need to capture it properly and dispose of it properly and just stop messing places up.
Yeah, no, well, it's a fair point. Mark, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
I just love the fact that when it comes to space science and all these sorts of things, you are dealing with the minuscule.
Yeah.
You know, because you're talking about things that are travelling at such incredible velocity, and the tiniest of things can cause so much damage. I wonder if it won't actually be properly tackled until something tiny hits a manned craft.
Damage.
And then there's a catastrophe in space like that.
Absolutely fascinating, though, isn't it? Isn't it
Oh,
fascinating
yeah.
to talk about? Always enjoy a space story. Let us know what you think about that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Should there be a global treaty in order to fix this? Go retrieve all the space junk. I do like the idea of a big net.
Big net.
I was going to ask that question. I thought it would sound a bit silly, but go up with a big net.
But that would catch the big stuff. But what do you do about the little stuff? And that I just don't know.
There's so much of it.
Don't know. You loads have been in touch on Lineker. This is an interesting one. Paula in Reading, hi Paula, says, I don't care whether BBC employees air their views on politics or not, but comparing things to Germany in the 1930s was disrespectful to the millions who died in World War II, so he does deserve some kind of punishment.
And many people are saying that, saying, why Gary Lineker has spoken about his political views before. Why is this time different? I think for many people, it is exactly that, isn't it? It's that rhetoric around
Of course, the bad news,
Nazi Germany.
The bad news for the BBC is, of course, it pulls in the licence fee issue again, doesn't it? Because the problem with all of this is we're paying for all this, and we're paying Gary Lineker's £1.3 million and all the rest of it. Roger, hi Roger, says, can the licence fee payers have solidarity and not have to pay for something that we don't like? A lot of people would not be too annoyed with Gary Lineker if we weren't forced with the threat of imprisonment if we didn't pay to listen to his political bias. Well, of course, he's saying it on Twitter, Roger, to be fair to Gary Lineker. He's saying this on Twitter and not on air. But I get your point. We have to pay for Gary Lineker, whether we watch it or agree with him or anything else, whether we want to or not. We don't have a choice.
And we know what his views are, don't we? And again, questions about the licence fee from Eddie in Worthing, who says the BBC cannot have this funding system and then hire only left-leaning presenters. They don't give the public the freedom not to pay the fee. Well, keep those views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots more to come, including more on Gary Lineker. But first, let's have a look at today's weather.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. It will be turning milder this weekend, but it's cold out there this morning. Potentially pretty icy as well, especially where we've had some snow. The culprit for that snow, this area of low pressure, has now cleared away. Weather fronts are trying to push in from the west, but for most places, it's a dry, sunny start, but it is frosty out there. Now, this weather front is providing dull and damp conditions in the southwest. Mostly rain here, but some snow over the moors. And as that wet weather creeps into parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, here too, a little bit of snow is likely during the day. Again, mostly over hills, however. For much of northern and eastern England and most of Scotland, it'll be a fine, bright day with sunny spells. But it is cold. Temperatures 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8, perhaps in 1 or 2 spots. It is turning milder, though, in the southwest, and that is a sign of things to come. But the cold air still in place over northern England and Scotland. So as this wet weather comes in later today, parts of the Midlands too, we are going to see some snowfall. Not lasting too long, but it could cause some further disruptions spreading into Scotland through the night. Slippery conditions on the roads. So, yes, the Met Office do have another warning in place. It won't be as cold tomorrow morning as it is this morning. Most places staying above freezing, but still cold enough for sleet and snow to be falling first thing across northern Scotland. For a good part of England and Wales, tomorrow's a dry and a bright day. Again, some sunshine around before things cloud over. Rain will push into Northern Ireland and Scotland, and it will mostly be rain at this stage, just some snow on the tops of the mountains, because it's turning milder by the end of the day, double digits almost across the board. The cold air still in place across northern Scotland, but elsewhere turning much, much milder. Could be into the teens by the end of Sunday. At the same time, another weather system comes in, bringing wet weather on Sunday night. But although it's turning milder this weekend, look at this. The blues and the cold air return next week.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Gary Lineker has been sidelined from Match of the Day in that row over impartiality.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Saturday, the 11th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
So these are your top stories this morning, and the BBC has suspended Gary Lineker from Match of the Day after he criticised the government's asylum policies and made some comparisons to 1930s Germany. The programme will air without a presenter or pundits after regular commentators said they stand in solidarity with Lineker.
The UK is to fund a new detention centre in France to tackle small boat channel crossings. The Prime Minister and the French President have agreed to a £480 million payout over the next 3 years to help tackle the ongoing crisis.
Loads of you getting in touch on those key issues this morning. We'd love to hear from you. That was all about space junk, which we've just been talking about. Maybe we'll touch on that again.
I'm sure
Who knows? Because there's about 130 million bits of space junk in low Earth orbit, and it's reaching a point where we may not be able to get off the surface of the planet unless it's tackled. So maybe we'll talk about that again.
Sure.
You never know. In the meantime, drop us an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
To our top story now, and Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day following his row with the BBC over his politicised tweets.
The broadcaster says he won't present the programme until he's reached an agreed and clear position with the corporation over his use of social media.
Well, the announcement was followed by fellow pundits Ian Wright and Alan Shearer, saying they also would not appear on Saturday's programme in solidarity, they said, with Lineker.
So let's find out exactly what's going on with Aidan McGee. Aidan, good morning. So what is the latest on all of this? Where do we stand?
Well, it started moving quite quickly last night. I mean, this is a thing in the social media era, isn't it? Things just like gather pace so quickly in a way they probably didn't in previous eras. But yeah, we saw that Gary Lineker was taken off air, having previously said that he'd be presenting the show. Ian Wright then follows up by saying, I'm not going to do it, #solidarity. Alan Shearer the same. And then it started snowballing from there. We then got a revelation late last night that other presenters had been asked to not just be presenting, but also to be a pundit. And Jermaine Genius has said that he hadn't been offered it because he was doing something else, but if he had, he wouldn't have been in a position to do it. He didn't feel he'd be able to do it. And then we started hearing rumours last night that the commentators were starting to pull out. And then Steve Wilson, an experienced guy at the BBC, been there many years, comes out and says all the commentators are not going to be working on tonight's show, and that the corporation would have to take the live feed from overseas, so there will be commentary. And then rumours also around last night that even players, even managers were considering not speaking to Match of the Day tonight. So I've never known a situation like this. This is an institution that celebrates 60 years next year. It pulls in a viewing audience of around about 11, 12, 13 million. And they're expensive rights, £211 million over 3 years. So where it leaves the corporation, where it leaves the programme is unknown. But tonight we'll just have to see what the viewing figures are, because they'll be very interesting when we hear about them.
Will be.
Certainly going to be very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, Aidan, thank you. Let's talk to sports journalist, my old mucker, Chris Scudder. Chris, good morning to you. What do you make of all of this? And obviously you've been in the business a very long time. This whole impartiality, I mean, is Lineker within his rights to do what he's doing whilst being employed by the BBC, do you think?
Well, bottom line is he's freelance, so that's always what he's maintained. Now, I'm just going to take you back to the start of the World Cup in Qatar, when Gary Lineker, the first thing almost he said on the BBC on their first broadcast was a speech about human rights. He was there on his soapbox, and it took a few people by surprise, really. I mean, he was there airing maybe not his views. We don't know who wrote that speech as it was. But, I mean, is that different to what has happened and his comments on social media? I'm not sure it is, really. And I think that's why a lot of people in the business have come out on his side. And as Aidan was saying, I mean, nobody wants to work for the BBC tonight. I mean, they will have commentary because they have what they call the world feed, where people who call the matches, commentate on the matches, are less well known. But that's what they're going to have. There's going to be no presentation. Nobody will do it. As soon as Ian Wright said, I'm not doing it, it was like a pack of cards. And so it's a real mess for the BBC. Impartiality. I mean, the trouble is, Stephen, as you well know, I mean, the social media and Twitter in particular has caused a real problem because it's become an aside for everybody, where they feel they can say things that maybe they wouldn't broadcast. I was always told, working for a different broadcaster, that you don't tweet what you wouldn't broadcast. Maybe, but it would in different times now. And Gary's always maintained that he doesn't tweet just willy-nilly or when he's had a drink. He does it when he believes in something. He's not going to back down, I don't think. And judging by the way everyone's lined up behind him in the industry, then maybe the Beeb are going to have to back down.
What do you make of the BBC's handling of this? Because they kept relatively quiet this week, didn't they, as the story just got bigger and bigger. And then yesterday it seemed as though they had asked Gary Lineker to step aside. Richard Bacon, their former BBC presenter, has said they have thrown a canister of petrol on the issue. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's inflamed, certainly. I mean, it was 3 days. I mean, I think the fact that it could have got to the end of the week and nothing happened, and all of a sudden, I mean, clearly what has happened, they've been talking to him and saying, can you make some kind of statement? I think the trouble has been his reference was inflammatory. He's not called the BBC Nazis. It's the language. But as soon as you mention 1930s Germany, that's the image that comes into mind, isn't it? So they've been talking all week. He has been clear that he's not going to change his mind. So they've come to this impasse. That gap it doesn't reflect well on them now, I don't think. And the interesting thing is going to be just where it goes now, because if he doesn't back down, something's got to give. Then where does it leave Match of the Day? I mean, some people would say, well, we don't need pundits, we don't need, people. Opinion's always divided on social media, isn't it? But some would say, we don't need commentators, but not pundits and presenters for Match of the Day. But the majority do. Something has got to give. I mean, tonight's going to be a fascinating watch. There'll be football, but it'll be very dry, and it'll be, here it is, off it goes, and on to the next week, which is going to be fascinating, I think.
Right, OK, well, let's get your personal opinion, Chris. Because I tell you what, we both worked together for a big broadcaster. And there were various rules and things in place that we had to follow. At the BBC, the Director General, the DG, in 2020 said, if you're employed by the BBC, when it comes to social media, you have to be impartial. And so all the rank and file are doing it. Gary Lineker hasn't, and he's been called in and called in and called in, and now he's done it again. I mean, there can't be a situation, can there?
Haven't they said, Stephen, that they're not stopping him have an opinion on things that he believes in, and he clearly does believe in this issue, the immigration thing and refugees. He's compassionate about it. It's the language he's used, which has changed.
But that's damaging to the organisation, isn't it? And to the BBC, which presumably they then have a right to say, well, if you're damaging our reputation, we don't want you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happened. But, I mean, if you look at the statement yesterday, it all seems a bit woolly to me. Until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media, which says to me, they've said to him, look, just rein it in a little bit. It's all a bit woolly. And now they've come to this where he has maybe overstepped the mark with that reference. It's not called them Nazis, but, it's a reference which inflames a lot of opinion, clearly, So that's the issue. And they've got to decide now how they're going to go forward with his use of language, I don't know, but he's digging his heels in. It may be that he just walks away now, I don't know. But, I mean, I think the fact he will be feeling pretty good this morning. I think that the fact that everyone has rallied behind him, all of his media colleagues, even the commentator Steve Wilson coming out last night. I think people thought that they would turn up and do their job, but it's a world feed now, which is a basic thing. If you're in any country in the world, what you'd hear in their coverage of the Premier League is what you'll see on the BBC tonight.
What do you think will happen then? I mean, looking ahead to next Saturday, do you think that is it possible for it to blow over by then? Or do you think both sides are entrenched now?
I don't think there'll be another programme like tonight's going to look. So something will give. I think the B will back down a bit. I don't think we've seen the end of Gary. He's a popular figure. I mean, listen, it does divide opinion. He earns a lot of money from the taxpayers. And always when you have opinions, people don't agree. There's always somebody who doesn't agree. Gary is... I mean, I probably wouldn't have... When it comes to social media, I always think of what do people want to hear from me. And, Gary's not a political guy, but he has strong beliefs. Where do we draw the line, really? When can you say... I mean, it happened to me once when I was a former broadcaster and I was accused of crossing the line, and it was about protecting football contracts. So I upset somebody and it blew over. It's the same kind of thing. But... the BBC is different because of the impartiality rules, and people are paying his wages. So there are a lot of people who just want him to stop doing what he does. But he is freelance, and the BBC have said that we're not going to stop you having an opinion. So I think that he will think about that, and there may be a little bit of an impasse, and then they'll come together and they'll muddle through it. Because what are they going to do? I mean, if nobody's going to do the programme next week, it's a massively popular. It's the Premier League. It's the biggest football league in the world, and the BBC are proud of having their highlight show on a Saturday night. So I think this is going to be a one-off tonight, and a lot of it's going to. The story will rumble on for days because of the talks that'll go on. But I don't think Gary's going to stop tweeting, put it that way.
Yeah, lovely. Scott, thanks very much indeed. Good to talk to you this morning. It's interesting here because I don't know what if you're... Are you sort of on the Lineker side of all of this? I don't know. Because I tend to think I'm more on the other side. I sort of think if that's who you work for, then you've got to follow the rules. And I don't like one rule for one and one rule for everybody else.
Well, having worked at the BBC for several years, I can safely say that there are people within that building who've been very angry at this for a very long time. I mean, this isn't the first time that we've seen Gary Lineker tweet his political opinion. And there are employees within the BBC, well, everybody else, really, rank and file, who have to be very strict with themselves, not only on social media, but in their personal lives. For example, you're not allowed to go to protests and that kind of thing, for fear of sharing your political opinion. So it is difficult for those within the BBC to see somebody seemingly getting away with sharing their opinion, but not anymore. But then we've seen other pundits and presenters pull out. So I don't think the BBC were expecting that either.
No.
It's a bit of a mess.
No, it'd be fascinating to get your thoughts on it. So far, you're not backing Gary Lineker, but actually do you think he's right just to say what he wants?
Yeah. I've got a tweet, actually.
Go on.
This is Neil Mukherjee, who's been in touch with us, who says the impartiality of the BBC is vital. Documentaries such as the Diana documentary of 1995 have proven to be partial and agenda-based reporting. We cannot just snap our fingers and call for impartiality. Yeah.
Well, let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. In the meantime, if you're a Match of the Day fan, because it isn't really happening tonight, is it? So... Why
Don't
bother?
worry, though.
No,
Don't
we've got
worry.
it covered.
Yeah, we've got it covered. We've stepped up, haven't we? Stepped up to the mark.
Yeah, because tonight, 10 o'clock, we have got the alternative Match of the Day with Mark Dolan, packed with stars, packed with pundits, loads of pundits. So we've got all the football properly covered for you tonight, 10 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's bring you up to date with the other stories that are going on today. And junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary did not attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned 3-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors voted to take industrial action over demands for a 35% pay increase.
NHS England says more than 100,000 patients have been treated in virtual wards in the last year. That's having your vital signs monitored remotely. Bosses say the scheme has been a game changer, helping patients avoid unnecessary hospital trips and, where possible, enabling them to be discharged sooner.
The Met Office has issued a warning for snow remaining in place for much of Scotland over the weekend. It comes as the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service also issued an alert about the risk of wildfires, would you believe? Fire officials say dry winter conditions can create the ideal circumstances for wildfires to spread.
Now let's turn our attention to the other side of the channel, should we? Because the UK is going to help fund a detention centre on French soil to try to stop the flow of migrants crossing into the UK via the channel on those small boats.
Yes, the deal was agreed in Paris yesterday between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron at a summit to tackle the issue.
Now, it's thought the UK is going to pay about £480 million over 3 years to help fund the measures, which should be fully operational by 2026.
Well, to go over this and more, we're joined now by the founder of Youth Vote UK, Alexander Cairns. Great to have you in the studio with us, Alexander.
Morning.
So let's talk first of all about that summit, because it was significant, wasn't it? The first Anglo-French summit in 5 years, and it certainly looked very cosy, didn't it, between Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron?
Yeah, and there's been this bromance described. I think I welcome it. I think it's very good to see a good working relationship between the French president and Rishi Sunak. Obviously, you know, Liz Truss famously said the jury's out on Rishi, so on Macron. So it's good to see them working together. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you supportive broadly of what we've seen announced so far? I mean, I know we haven't got the returns deal. We knew that was never going to happen, to be fair. The government wasn't expecting that to come off. But is this a significant step to reducing, just tackling what is a big problem for the UK?
I don't know if it's a significant step, because I think, to be honest, what we've seen is naturally, with nearly 50,000 people that went through the kind of boats last year in 2022, we actually haven't necessarily seen anyone that's been flown to Rwanda. We've been paying the French for, a couple of years now. Those numbers have been going up. So,
but to be fair, they've apparently caught 50% of people trying to cross the channel so far this year.
But so it's interesting though, because actually we've maybe caught more, but we're still seeing a massive backlog in the Home Office of actually dealing with those applications. There's 120,000 backlog. We haven't necessarily, the policy was to have people, sent back to their country or sent back to Rwanda. We haven't seen too many of that. So I think there's a lot of rhetoric here, there are a lot of big numbers, but actually in terms of the detail, operationally, the Home Office is a mess. So it actually means that it's probably why Rishi Sunak wants France to do more of the operational work, because the UK has shown that it just doesn't have the capacity to do it, to be honest.
We've handed £232 million worth in individual payments since 2014 to the French. We're talking now about another 500 million. I wanted to bring you Rob's thoughts just now, Alexander. This is on email. Rob in Devon. Here we go again. Rishi throwing more of our money down the drain. Macron is laughing all of the way to the bank. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I agree, actually. I think the reality is it's quite interesting. We haven't heard how much the French are spending on this, probably because it's not a lot, actually.
Well, we've been teased. The government is saying 5 times as much as we are.
Yeah, and I really don't know what to make of that. That could be true, could not be true. I think, to be honest, the fact that previously we're spending about 60, 70 million a year, if you work out 500 million across 3 is 180 million, it's gone up 3x. The reality is, I don't think we just can't chuck money at this issue. It's a very complicated issue, and actually, as a lot of people have been rightly saying, this is more of a UK issue than a French issue, and therefore the French have got leverage. They're not going to spend, 500-600 million on an operational issue that's more of a UK than a French issue, for sure. Yeah.
But isn't it money's well spent for us, in the sense that if it's stopping people in France and detention centres in France, if they're not crossing the channel, then they're not costing us anything here. We're not having to accommodate them in centres. We're not having to pay for deportation and all those expenses which are surrounding that.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what actually happens with, the deterrent. It's going to take a couple of years to become operational. There's going to be obviously a couple of hundred officers on that range of beaches. But let's remember, it's a very, very big channel, and I think operationally it's going to be very difficult to stop. And you've got to remember, in terms of the smugglers, they're very creative with how they do this. So, the proof's going to be in the pudding. We're going to have to see if the numbers come down. And unfortunately, I suspect that it's going to make a small dent, but for the amount of money we're getting, the return on investment, probably not enough of a dent for the British public to think, you know what, in the cost of living crisis, let's spend £500 million on this issue when we could be spending £500 million on, a range of things, supporting the NHS, whatever it is, right? I think it's about priorities, and I don't know if many people think it's the right money spent at the right time.
OK. Alexander. Thank you very much indeed. We'll do everything in sync this morning.
Very good.
I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Is it money well spent?
Yeah. Peter certainly thinks so on Twitter. 480 million is a lot of money to pay to France, he says. But if this new agreement is more successful than the last one, it should be worth it.
It's going to be interesting to see. The problem with all of this, and this is why what might stretch your patience, is it's going to take time.
Yeah.
It's all going to take time. Be much more of an immediate impact if the government's bill gets through and people can be sort of immediately deported. But I guess the problem with that is deported to where? Because we haven't got a returns agreement in place yet. So there are questions. Rishi Sunak, of course, said he would stop the boats by the end of the year, which seems like a very big task at the moment.
Did he make a rod for his own back?
Might have done that, but
Let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Now, sticking with politics, of course, it's the budget next week, and ahead of that, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has spoken to Esther and Philip on his plans to deliver growth and tackle inflation.
It's not what I want at all. But, by the way, Liz Truss was right to say that the central question is how we deliver growth. Where I think the mini-budget was wrong was to say you can borrow to cut taxes, because that's not sustainable. That's not money that you've actually got. That's money you're borrowing. And so if we're going to cut taxes permanently, then it needs to be a tax cut that we earn through higher growth. And the first step is stability. And for stability, you need responsible public finances. And that's why we took some very difficult decisions. We did increase taxes. We actually cut spending by more than we increased taxes in the autumn statement. So it was a very, very difficult statement. What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
So we have now, to use his words, a responsible outlook for Britain's future economy. Now, that's interesting. I think that's really interesting. Do we want that, or do we want to look long-term, or do you want immediate boost in your purse?
I think the mini-budget might have forced his hand, and the fallout from the mini-budget might mean that, as he said, he wants to cut taxes, but it might not be the best idea in terms of Britain's longer-term economic future.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to, and it's difficult because politicians want to give voters what they want,
especially Conservative politicians.
Because that's how you win votes, basically. But are they doing then a good thing by saying, well, actually, and we know you don't want this, but it's responsible. But it's just fascinating. I think it's fascinating. Yeah. It's going to be a fascinating, in-depth interview. You can watch it all on Esther and Phil's show. That's at 10 o'clock this morning, and we'll speak to them both, actually, just after 9 o'clock.
Now let's head up to Scotland now, shall we? Because the race for the Scottish National Party's new leader and the country's new First Minister is continuing full steam ahead this weekend.
Yeah, they're battling it out on the airwaves, but they're also trying to win over SNP members privately in the latest string of hustings.
Yes, the ballot to select the next leader will be open at noon on Monday and will close on the 27th of March. So who better to go through the latest with this? Rather than the political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Michael Blackley, who joins us now. Michael, good morning to you and thank you for your company this morning. So take us through the hustings last night. What were the main takeaways and did we learn anything new?
Yes, it was another one of these hustings events. There's been almost every night since this campaign launched either a televised debate or a hustings debate. Last night's was in Edinburgh and there was quite a range of issues. Quite interesting at the start of the event when Kate Forbes was pressed on some of her Christian views and her opposition to same-sex marriage. And one of the more bizarre things that happened was the candidate Ash Regan talked about her plans for a currency, a Scottish currency in an independent Scotland. She came up with some new designs for this currency. One of them featured a unicorn. And she also claimed that this progression to a Scottish currency could happen within weeks of an independence vote, which is a position that a lot of people think, and a lot of people in the SNP think is pretty bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. From what you mentioned, if they're the main sort of takeaways from last night, why aren't they talking about matters that are directly affecting people in Scotland right now? I mean, there's a cost of living crisis. I know you've averted some strikes north of the border, but there's still strike action taking place. There's what we're told, a crisis in the health service. Isn't this what people really want to hear?
Yes, I think that is interesting because when some of the candidates have been talking publicly in media interviews, Kate Forbes, for example, has consistently talked about the economy and the cost of living crisis. However, when it comes to these events that are filled with SNP members, they always tend to be shifted back to issues like independence. So I think you see there the juggling act that some of the candidates have. They know that the wider public don't want to be talking about independence. They want to be talking about the things that are priorities to them. But when it comes to a room full of SNP members, independence and the path to independence is one of the most crucial things for them. There was some polling that was released yesterday, which I thought was very interesting and perhaps shows some of the challenges for these candidates. It showed that whichever candidate wins, there are more voters that say they're less likely to vote the SNP under that candidate than more likely. So there's actually a real challenge to the SNP and its push for independence by this leadership contest, because it's starting to look to a lot of people like the wheels are coming off after 15 years of SNP growth, and they could have some pretty challenging times ahead.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Look, Michael, really good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. We're going to keep across all of that, of course. The ballot opens Monday, but till the 27th, which is a week on the Sunday. It's the best part of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Is that right? Is my maths right? But anyway, it's happening a lot quicker than it did with the Tories.
It certainly is, and it's so interesting. I mean, the internal divisions between the SNP really are being laid bare. I suppose we saw the same thing with the Tories. Perhaps that is the nature of the hustings.
Yeah, it's never a good time for a political party getting a new leader, to be perfectly honest.
You do want to keep it quite short, as short as you can,
short and
really.
Sweet.
Yeah.
But anyway, look, coming up, we're going to talk all things royal, including Prince Edward becoming the Duke of Edinburgh.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. The time is 7:31. Still lots to come on today's programme.
Yeah, we're going to be getting the latest on the Six Nations before England play France late this afternoon. Talking to former England rugby international Tom Van Dell. That's at 8:20.
And at 9:20, we'll be speaking to actress Sue Holderness about her work to tackle fraud among over 65s.
Yeah, if you think, oh, that name sounds familiar. Marlene. It's Marlene from Only Fools and Horses.
We're very excited about that.
Very excited, and she's got a really strong message. She's been conned herself online, so she's got experience of this, and she'll be able to have some really good tips on how we need to just make ourselves just more aware of what to look out for.
Yeah.
Loads of thoughts coming through. Thank you. Keep them coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk. We'll go through lots in just a moment. But we need to talk royals because, as we told you yesterday, and I think it's really welcome news, actually, that King Charles has made Prince Edward the Duke of Edinburgh. It was a birthday present, actually.
It's quite a nice one, isn't it?
Yeah, for his 59th birthday yesterday.
Yes, the announcement comes off the back of rumours the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will attend the coronation in May.
Ah, huzzah. Let's talk to royal correspondent Michael Cole, who joins us now. Michael, good morning to you. Look, let's start with the positive, should we? The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. I mean, we were expecting this ever since Philip died. However, it does seem just like a very fitting title for this hard-working royal couple.
Yes, indeed, that's right. Good morning to you both. If you're the king, what do you give your baby brother for his 59th birthday? Well, of course, here we are, have a royal dukedom, and here it is. And you're absolutely right. I knew at one time Prince Edward quite well. And I know for a certainty that for the last 3 decades, he's worked extremely hard for the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme. I worked for a company that was a major sponsor of the scheme, and we paid for fundraising dinners in Cardiff and Birmingham and London, and he was always there. In fact, I remember the one in Birmingham, he was sitting next to Catherine Zeta-Jones, but that was before he met his own wife, Sophie Rhys-Jones, and she met Michael Douglas, of course. And he was always very affable and hardworking, as you say. It is quite interesting that when he did get married to Sophie, the Duke of Edinburgh said to both of them, how would you like to become Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh? And of course they said, well, thank you very much, Grandpa, or father in his case. It was even promulgated on the Buckingham Palace website that they were going to be. And then it suddenly disappeared. And it looked as if the king was thinking twice about it. And there were rumours that he was going to give the title of Duchess of Edinburgh to Princess Charlotte. And that would have been a bit galling for Sophie to be trumped by an 8-year-old princess. But anyway, the king's done the right thing. And the new Duke of Edinburgh was up there in the great city of Edinburgh, where I once lived, meeting the people of his new bailiwick and looking very happy about it.
Look, very happy to see them both. Certainly very welcome news for a very hard-working royal couple. We do have to have a quick word, I'm afraid, on Harry and Meghan, because it's believed they are now coming to the coronation.
Well, I think that's a very misleading story, actually, because the king has played a blinder in this. He always made it clear that both of them were very welcome to his coronation, and he's left it to them to decide whether to come. Now, they haven't said one way or the other. If they decline, it will make them look a little bit mean-spirited and a little bit petty. And of course, if they accept, it will leave them open to the charge of hypocrisy, because they've been knocking 7 bells off the institution of monarchy, and indeed most of the members of the royal family over the last couple of years. So if they do turn up, we'll say, well, what was that all about? You know, and there is a slight complication that the coronation day, 6th of May, put it in your diary, is the 4th birthday of Prince Archie. So what's going to happen? I don't believe that we know yet. They haven't said. It could be that Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, stays at home in California with the little boy, and perhaps Prince Harry comes here alone. There's going to be a lot of tension about this, and I think perhaps sooner or later, but better sooner, they should say what their intentions are, because actually we don't know, Ellie.
No, I bet we don't find out till the day before, Michael. Nothing would surprise me. Really good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. It would be awkward, wouldn't it?
I don't know. Again, that's another issue. I don't know which side of the fence to come down on that one. I don't know what's for the best. I really don't. Anyway, look, don't go anywhere. We've got all the papers heading your way in just a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Doobs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Good morning. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Let's have a look at the newspapers for you this morning. We'll kick off with the Express. It's gone with that £478 million deal with France to try to end the small boats crisis.
Similarly, The Independent has questioned what Britain is getting out by handing France £500 million to solve the small boats crisis.
The Times has support from fellow presenters who've refused to stand in for Gary Lineker following his suspension from Match of the Day.
And the Daily Mail also reporting on Gary Lineker's suspension, claiming one source has described the presenter's mutiny as a proper BBC crisis.
Let's go through the papers then. In a bit more detail with political editor for HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield, and assistant editor for The Spectator, Cindy Yu. Good morning to both of you. Let's kick off with the Mail, should we, Kevin? And trying to get the Chancellor wants the long-term sick to get back to work.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the governments do this for quite some time, actually. Successive policies, obviously not entirely successful, but yeah, it's the budget on Wednesday, and Jeremy Hunt will unveil a workforce review. Now, it's two-pronged, so there's, at one end, they're looking to get long-term sick back to work and introducing more conditionality, basically, so you'll get more support to get back to work, but if you don't take a job, then you'll have benefits reduced. So
it's proper carrot and stick.
Carrot and stick thing, exactly. And at the other end, there's also going to be measures to try and encourage over 50s who have left the workforce since the pandemic to come back, because basically they need them to pay tax.
Nearly you and me, Kevin.
It is. Next year.
Yeah, oh God.
Anyway, but the thought, actually, it's quite a nice thought that you'd be able to give up work when you turn 50. Sadly, not an option for me.
No.
But apparently 630,000 adults have left the labour market since the start of the pandemic. That's a lot of people. And it's a lot of tax revenue that the Treasury would dearly love to get their hands on in order to fund public services, grow the economy, etc. So yes, that's going to be one of the key...
And that's all to do with pensions, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does that mean that those changes to pensions, would they apply to everyone or just those over 50 going back?
I think, no, it would apply to everyone. It'd be
so good news for... Yeah.
Oh, so there you go. If we're looking at it from our point of view.
Yeah, why not?
But I think it's going to be a steady as she goes budget. Obviously, a lot of Tory MPs want tax cuts. There's not going to be tax cuts, certainly not in this budget. So yeah, this is going to be one of the big ticket announcements on Wednesday.
Certainly what Jeremy Hunt is alluding to, isn't it? It's the full interview with Esther and Phil at 10 o'clock this morning, but saying exactly that. He'd like to see tax cuts, but it's not going to happen this Wednesday at least. Cindy, let's have a look at the Mail, shall we? And there's backlash as the Prime Minister says Ukraine war will have to end in negotiation.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister has been criticised by various senior and former senior military figures about saying this. So yesterday in the press conference with Macron, that he said that this war will have to end in negotiation at some point, that all conflicts end in negotiations. But these senior military figures have said that this is kind of defeatism. Ukraine could win this war if we give them enough military aid. It could take back all of its territory. And I think what's interesting...
Oh, Cindy, we've got a problem with your... I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because what you're saying is very interesting. I'm just going to stand behind you so you can talk into my mic.
What I think is interesting about this story is that how expectations have changed over the last year. Stephen, this is a bit distracting, actually.
Is it?
Yeah. But over the last year, at the beginning of the war, people thought, when can this end? What's the off-ramp for Russia? Now we're talking about taking back Crimea, taking back all of the lost Ukrainian territories. And it's interesting how the West has kind of shifted the expectations here on where the war ends.
I think it's very interesting. Look, we're going to go back to Kevin now while we get someone in to swap your mic.
Kevin,
the things you have to do in this business,
At least we all know it's live telly, hey? If these things didn't happen, you wouldn't
know.
Kevin, let's have a look at you then, and the Times. And this is phrases such as pig out, dehumanise overweight people, we're being told.
Apparently so, yes. So the British Dietetic Association has issued new guidelines on how to refer to people who are overweight. So phrases such as pig out are out because it dehumanises.
But that's not... If you pig out, that doesn't mean you're overweight, does it? It means you're just having a pig out.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand quite why that...
Yeah, I tend to agree. War on obesity, you're not allowed to say that anymore.
You're not supposed to say what?
War on obesity.
Oh, right.
Because that's like an attack on someone. The guidelines also suggest avoiding terms such as obese person or overweight person in favour of person with obesity or individual with a higher weight.
Oh, come on.
And they also point to things like Monica and Friends, Mum's always used to show you flashbacks of when she was
fat, yeah.
overweight.
A person with obesity.
Person, yes, that is out. So they're just saying that it's about not wanting to stigmatise people who are.
But you don't want to stigmatise. You mean you don't want to stigmatise, and you don't want people to feel terrible about their. You know, people should be body positive, but you've also got to do what is healthy. And I tell you what, I really hate is that people with obesity, because he did that with diabetes. You know, you're not a diabetic; you're a person with diabetes, and I think that.
It's literally splitting
is the word I'm looking for. Well, and actually, there is something positive. I mean, it's different with obesity, I guess, but there's from a diabetic point of view, there is something positive about saying, I am a diabetic, I am a type 1 diabetic, because if you own that, you can then manage it more. Yeah. Rather than saying, it's just something that's happening.
It's literally splitting hairs. And I was saying to Kevin in the green room, you know, I wish whoever wrote this guide would get a real job, you know. Like, I'm sure there's many more important things for this organisation to be getting on with.
Well, you'd think so.
And they're also medical terms, aren't they? I mean, to be obese is a medical term. To be overweight is as well. It's what the NHS would refer to you as.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what they say about putting on a bit of timber. Is that on the banned list as well? It will be.
Well, that's just been added now.
That's just been added. I've done that.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Dietitians, there you go. I think it's very useful. It says you're diabetics, you see a dietitian thing. It's very useful. But anyway, there you go. Cindy, Kevin, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll get your battery sorted and then we boot you out, Cindy. It's how it works. But we will see you.
You're silencing me. GBNews are silencing me.
We will see you in the next hour. Thank you very much indeed.
OK, let's bring you up to date with what else is going on today. And junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary did not attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned 3-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors voted to take industrial action over demands for a 35% pay increase.
NHS England says more than 100,000 patients have been treated in virtual wards over the last year, having vital signs monitored remotely. Bosses say it's a game changer because it helps patients avoid trips to the hospital and can also enable them to be discharged sooner.
The Met Office has issued a warning for snow remaining in place for much of Scotland over the weekend. It comes as the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service also issued an alert about the risk of wildfires, would you believe? Fire officials say dry winter conditions can create the ideal circumstances for wildfires to spread.
Now, bloated egos. Oh, you get a lot of them in the television business. You get even more in Hollywood. So sometimes those egos require a little bit of deflation, especially during Oscar season.
Yes, and for more than 40 years, they've been the objective of the Razzie Awards.
Oh, yes, they celebrate the best of the worst in film, and they're announced the day before the Oscars. So who get the dishonours this year? Stephanie Tetchy is here. Morning.
Good morning, Stephen.
I love the Razzies.
I love the Razzies.
I love it when the stars turn up as well, because they often do.
I think it's such good promotion, actually, because I think it's everything in life. You need balance. You can't just always be awarded for good stuff. Sometimes cinema goers do need to have their say on movies which haven't been so entertaining, haven't been great, and that is what the Razzies are for. But there has been some prize nominations, like, for instance, Tom Hanks. I love him. I think he's brilliant. But he's actually won Worst Supporting Actor for his role as Colonel Lewis Parker in Elvis for playing his manager.
That's surprising.
And also he won another Razzie today for Worst Screen Combo in Elvis, because they were saying for all the latex that was put on his face to play in the movie as well. But surprisingly, Blonde, which is actually Ana de Armas, she's up for Best Actress tomorrow in the Oscars, and she, the picture, it won Worst Picture today for Blonde, and there was like 8 nominations that was up for it.
Did I watch that? Is it on Netflix?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So the reason why they've put Blonde up there, because they're saying that they keep on dishonouring Marilyn Monroe even following her death. And, you know, with Blonde, there were certain bits of it where it was, you know, really exaggerated, and I think a lot of people think it's true to life, which it isn't. But, you know, also, which is quite funny for the Razzie Awards, they've actually awarded themselves for the worst actress for their blunder, because earlier this year, they sparked a lot of controversy where they were going to they nominated a 12-year-old actress, Ryan Kieran Armstrong, and obviously at 12 years old, that's a bit distasteful. So they've actually awarded themselves for their actress a blunder, which is quite funny.
Well, that's quite good. Well, they're sort of taking it on the chin
Yeah.
in that way.
And last year as well, like, they also made the mistake when they awarded Bruce Willis as well for worst acting performance, and then they didn't know actually he had been diagnosed with aphasia, so they also rescinded that award. So I think they're trying to find the balance.
At least they're self-aware.
Yeah, and that's the main thing. I think, you know, a lot of people think the Oscars can be quite egotistical. So...
Yeah.
Something that's caught my eye is the Razzie Redeemer Award. What's that about?
So this is basically, it's for the actor who should be on the list, but they actually think should get a pass and should actually be awarded for their acting talent. And this year it goes to Colin Farrell.
Right. Because he was a nominee for Worst Actor in 2004.
Yeah.
But there you go.
But
and now a front runner for Best Actor Oscar.
So it's quite interesting.
I do like it though, as I say, often, you know, they're just sort of dished out things. Did any of the stars turn up for all this?
They didn't turn up this year. Sylvester Stallone is not apparently happy for being nominated for Worst Actor this year, so he's been quite vocal on that. And in the past, they actually forced Eddie Murphy to retire from acting because he once won the Worst Actor for that, and he said it actually made him reflect on his career. So the Razzies do have a lot of power.
Oh, I still like it, though.
It has a lot of star power.
But if you're an actor in Hollywood, I reckon it does take a real blow to your ego, don't you think, if you get a Razzie?
Oh, I don't know.
Especially if you really...
But sometimes you do need to be turned down a notch.
Yeah.
You do.
It makes you want to work harder.
Now, I don't know if Razzies do goodie bags.
I don't think they do.
No, but the Oscars do. I was looking in the papers this morning, what's in the Oscars goodie bag for tonight, and it's... I mean, it's ridiculous. There's like sort of £40,000 worth of holidays.
Yeah, well, do you know what? That's nothing to the Oscars. This is like £1 billion, you know, company and award ceremony. So for them, all they've had to do is call a couple of mates and just get that all sorted. And, you know, it's to be expected. If you want the stars to turn up, the goodie bag is always important.
Isn't that fascinating?
It's probably people that don't need it, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
They don't need
they probably could buy it themselves.
Yeah.
They need to donate that, actually. I would prefer them to donate that to charities.
Actually, the money they would spend on goodie bags, donating it to charities...
I think that would be a more worthy cause.
That would be something, wouldn't it?
110%.
Yeah.
So needed.
Oh, interesting stuff. Stephanie, as always, thank you very much. We'll see you a little bit later on, aren't we?
Yes,
What are we talking about later on?
Oh, we're going to talk Gary Lineker and the celebrities who are voicing their support for him.
Right. OK, well, you don't look too happy.
No, we'll talk about that later.
Oh, lovely.
It's the biggest story in town, must be said, and we're going to continue to talk about it throughout the programme today. We're going to be talking, of course, about his suspension from Match of the Day tonight.
Yes, it's causing controversy. Are you one of those ones who supports him, like all of his colleagues on the show, or do you think the BBC's done the right thing and it's about time he took a back seat? Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
But first...
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Deacon, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. It will be turning milder this weekend, but it's cold out there this morning. Potentially pretty icy as well, especially where we've had some snow. The culprit for that snow, this area of low pressure, has now cleared away. Weather fronts are trying to push in from the west, but for most places, it's a dry, sunny start, but it is frosty out there. Now, this weather front is providing dull and damp conditions in the southwest. Mostly rain here, but some snow over the moors. And as that wet weather creeps into parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, here too, a little bit of snow is likely during the day. Again, mostly over hills, however. For much of northern and eastern England and most of Scotland, it'll be a fine, bright day with sunny spells. But it is cold. Temperatures 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 perhaps in 1 or 2 spots. It is turning milder though in the southwest, and that is a sign of things to come. But the cold air still in place over northern England and Scotland. So as this wet weather comes in later today, parts of the Midlands too, we are going to see some snowfall. Not lasting too long, but it could cause some further disruptions spreading into Scotland through the night. Slippery conditions on the roads. So, yes, the Met Office do have another warning in place. It won't be as cold tomorrow morning as it is this morning. Most places staying above freezing, but still cold enough for sleet and snow to be falling first thing across northern Scotland. For a good part of England and Wales, tomorrow's a dry and a bright day. Again, some sunshine around before things cloud over. Rain will push into Northern Ireland and Scotland, and it will mostly be rain at this stage, just some snow on the tops of the mountains, because it's turning milder by the end of the day, double digits almost across the board. The cold air still in place across northern Scotland, but elsewhere turning much, much milder. Could be into the teens by the end of Sunday. At the same time, another weather system comes in, bringing wet weather on Sunday night. But although it's turning milder this weekend, look at this. The blues and the cold air return next week.
Gary Lineker sidelined from Match of the Day in a row over impartiality.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Saturday, the 11th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
These are your top stories today. And the BBC has suspended Gary Lineker from Match of the Day after he criticised the government's asylum policies, referring to 1930s Germany. The programme will air without a studio presenter or any pundits, or in fact any match commentators, after they all said they stand in solidarity with the presenter.
The UK is to fund a new detention centre in France to tackle small boat channel crossings. The Prime Minister said the French President has agreed to a £480 million payout over the next 3 years to help the ongoing crisis.
And flat-faced dogs have risen in popularity over recent years, but at what cost? We're going to be talking to a vet amid warnings that breeds like pugs are twice as likely to experience breathing difficulties.
And you've got any pictures of pugs? Please send them in. We love a puppy picture here, don't we?
We do, but I have concerns about pugs. They're so popular, but they're not, it's not healthy.
Cute. They're so cute.
They look nice, but it's not a healthy way to be.
It's true, but Torin, lovely Torin here, one of the producers, she brings in her puppy every Friday, and he's lovely and he's a pug. But there are concerns about their breathing issues, so do let us know what you think about that. Do you own a pug? Is that something you worry about? gbnews@gbnews.uk. Now to our top story, and Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day tonight following his row with the BBC over his politicised tweets.
The BBC says he won't present the sports programme until they've reached an agreed and clear position over his use of social media.
Well, the announcement was followed by fellow pundits Ian Wright and Alan Shearer saying they would also not appear on tonight's programme in solidarity with Lineker.
Well, let's talk to our reporter Jack Carson, who's outside BBC's broadcasting house in Salford for us this morning. So, Jack, it's going to be just a shell of a show tonight.
That's right. The situation has changed drastically over the past 24 hours. It looked like yesterday the show would go ahead as normal, but it was in the evening, in the late afternoon, that everything started to change. It's thought that within the BBC hierarchy, above BBC Sport, bosses wanted Gary Lineker to make a public announcement, essentially amounting to an apology. After speaking to them, he started to inform other presenters, pundits, that he was not going to present the show and that he'd been asked to step back from presenting. And so Match of the Day said that it would essentially be a programme to go ahead without presenters or pundits, because the likes of Ian Wright, Alan Shearer, Alex Scott, Mika Richards all said that they would stand in solidarity with Gary Lineker and not be part of that show. The attention then turned to the commentators, and last night we got a statement from the Match of the Day commentators and the lead commentator Steve Wilson, who said that as commentators on Match of the Day, we've decided to step down from tomorrow night's broadcast. We're comforted that football fans who want to watch their teams should still be able to do so, and as management, management can use world feed commentary if they choose to. And so what we now see is that Match of the Day in jeopardy. Over 2 million people usually tune in to the show, but what the actual show is going to be tonight we really don't know. And it doesn't just stop there, because politicians of the Common Sense group in Parliament, led by the Tory John Hayes, they've all signed a letter demanding an apology from Gary Lineker. So we're unsure really where this situation ends, because Gary Lineker, with sources close to him, say that he would find it humiliating to make that public apology. But the BBC saying that until they can resolve this situation with him, he's got to step back from presenting duties and will not be on Match of the Day.
That's fascinating stuff. Jack, thanks very much indeed. In London, as you can see, not in Salford. But there you go.
Very interesting to see what will happen, though. I think that's what many people are thinking this morning. It's certainly going to look very different tonight, Match of the Day.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I'd love to... I would love to know what you really think. I just want to go back to Paula in Reading. This came in a couple of hours ago, actually, but I just think it's a really interesting point that Paula makes. She says, I don't care whether BBC employees air their views on politics or not, but comparing these things to Germany in the 1930s was disrespectful to the millions who died in World War II, so he does deserve some kind of punishment. Now that's a balanced view, I think, because is it because he tweeted in something political, which he does all the time, or is it because he used that frame of reference, which, I mean, you can't compare to Nazi Germany. Come on.
And for many people, that is the line that's been crossed, and that's what Paula is referencing there. Let us know what you think. Have the BBC handled this the right way? Should Gary Lineker have stepped back? Let us know. gbnews@gbnews.uk. But do not fear.
No.
If you usually watch Match of the Day, we've got you covered.
Yeah, because no point watching it tonight.
No, exactly.
I mean, there really
is very,
isn't.
very different tonight because we have a star-studded lineup tonight. We're going to have a Match of the Day alternative here on GB News at 10 p.m. Do make sure you tune into that.
Mark Dolan's hosting that. We've got it is star-studded. It also is pundit-studded, and it's going to be it's a proper football show. So it's not messing about. A proper football show tonight.
You're not going to miss out.
So you won't miss a thing. So give that a whirl.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll make it a regular thing.
No, exactly.
You never know.
It will take over.
If we get 15 million viewers, I think we might as well match of the day.
We might be on to a winner.
Oh, you could be. Anyway, let's bring you up to date with all the other top stories this morning at 6 minutes past 8.
Junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary did not attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned 3-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors voted to take industrial action over demands for a 35% pay rise.
NHS England says more than 100,000 patients have been treated in virtual wards over the last year, having vital signs monitored remotely. Bosses say it's a game changer, helping patients avoid trips to the hospital and also enabling them to be discharged sooner.
The Met Office has issued a warning for snow remaining in place for much of Scotland over the weekend. It comes as the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service also issued an alert about the risk of wildfires. Fire officials say dry winter conditions can create the ideal circumstances for wildfires to spread.
It's a very odd one, that wildfires, because you wouldn't dry conditions, yes, but it's not dry at the moment, is it?
More snow to come, we were told
more
earlier.
Snow and rain. However, it's all to do with the fact that it's been a very dry winter, so it's about ground saturation and all that sort of thing. So it's it might sound crackers, but actually it's a very real concern. Got to be careful. So no, I was going to say no barbecues, but who's going to be out barbecuing in this sort of weather?
Oh, I don't know. There are some crazy people out there who do things like that. There are people still wearing shorts, you know. I got on the train the other day and there's a man opposite me still wearing shorts. There's always one. Always one.
Were his legs blue?
Yeah, they were. Oh, yeah.
Why would you wear shorts?
I was wrapped up to the nines with my scarf and my...
I've got my long johns on as we speak.
As you speak?
Yeah, there you go.
Wow. Now you know.
Now, the UK is to help fund a detention centre on French soil. It's all, of course, to try to stop the flow of migrants crossing the UK via the Channel in those small boats.
Yes, the deal was agreed in Paris yesterday between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron at a summit to tackle the issue.
Now, it's thought the UK will pay about £480 million over the next 3 years to help fund the measures, which are expected to be fully operational by 2026.
Well, let's go over that and more. We're joined now by columnist and parliamentary sketch writer Madeleine Grant, now who joins us in the studio. Good morning to you, Madeleine. So first of all, let's look at this summit as a whole, because it was significant, wasn't it? The first in 5 years between the French President and the British Prime Minister, and it looked very cosy, didn't it? Lots of back rubbing and holding of one another.
It looked incredibly cosy. I mean, it was. It made the G7 look like, you know, a very kind of friendly affair by comparison.
Yes. So can we read into that? Because obviously it's been very difficult over the past 5 years. The relationships have been very strained. The fact that things are getting closer together, some people won't like it, but in terms of negotiation over difficult issues, it's got to be a positive thing, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the deal that Rishi Sunak was able to agree with the EU about the Northern Ireland, that was a sign of a real thawing of relations. And so far, I think, it hasn't really translated into a massive uptick in the polls, but I think it's about Rishi Sunak's task now is to show that he can translate that improved relation into very tangible gains that people actually feel on the ground.
Are the Brits and the French on equal footing here, Madeleine? Because there was a stark difference in rhetoric yesterday. Rishi Sunak was speaking very warmly about President Macron. He was calling him mon ami, my friend, and he said he was very fortunate to be serving alongside Macron, but Macron was saying he hoped to have the best possible relations, but the UK needs to fix the consequences of Brexit. That's quite a stark difference in rhetoric, isn't it?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I think that Rishi Sunak was... He often does have that sort of very affable, kind of polite demeanour when he's speaking publicly in general, but I think perhaps he was speaking with the relationship that he'd like to have rather than the one that they currently have.
So, best part of £500 million over 3 years. Is that going to be money well spent? We don't know exactly what the French are contributing to this. the rhetoric being floated out there is 5 times as much. Now, whether that's true or not, who knows? But from our perspective, is it going to make enough of a difference to be worth the dosh?
Well, the difficulty is that there's no, as the Prime Minister often says, there's no kind of single silver bullet that will solve this crisis. You have to look very carefully at the pull and push factors, and also to look at not just maybe coming together with France to enforce, to have better enforcement on the ground there, but also to have individual agreements with countries to return migrants. It's probably one of a number of different things, and but I think failure to do something about it will be totally cataclysmic for the Conservatives, because it seems to be one of those issues that no one has been able to get a grip on, and we're constantly told, the rhetoric of take back control from the referendum is totally kind of totally belied by the fact that we have borders that look increasingly permeable.
All right, so with that in mind, and we know as far as the public is concerned, according to the latest polling, the bill that was unveiled this week is popular, right? The voters tend to like the idea of what Rishi Sunak wants to achieve by deporting people as soon as if they arrive illegally, get them out and stay out. Without a returns policy in place, either with individual countries or with the EU, which is what Macron is saying, can any of that actually work?
Well, this is what I've been wondering since it was first announced. I don't think it's going to be in front of the Commons early next week, so we'll know the full details then. But it struck me that I didn't see how this bill had teeth where previous bills didn't, like the Nationality and Borders Bill, or like the problems with the Rwanda policy. It's yet to be explained, I think, fully how they would hope to have a different outcome than seeing it bound up endlessly in legal challenges, which has been the case for previous. But equally, the language has been so bullish that I do wonder if they have some kind of special solution, some tweak that does make it different, because otherwise they've really raised expectations. And if it doesn't work out again, it's a big risk for something, this kind of flagship policy like this, to be seen to be failing right before the next general election.
Do you think Rishi Sunak should have pushed for a returns policy yesterday in Paris? Because many people will see that we're pushing out this legislation. We're giving more money to France, 500 million we're talking about now, but 232 million so far since 2014. It's vast sums of money.
Yeah.
And so far, we still have this crisis in the Channel.
Well, exactly. I mean, I imagine, I can't think that he wouldn't have raised that issue behind closed doors. I mean, clearly there's a long way to go yet before something like that is going to be agreed publicly. But I completely agree with you. If it turns out to be something that's toothless and has no effect, it's going to really backfire on the government, because they have made such a song and dance about it, that if they, and it was one of the Prime Minister's 5 pledges or 5 missions or whichever it was at the start of the year.
Yeah. So he's going to have to deliver something, or he's got egg on his face. Yes. Which is not what you need in the run-up to a general election.
No, it's not.
Madeline, really good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Your thoughts on that, of course, very, very welcome. GB Views at gbnews.uk. John says, when will people realise our country is full up? We haven't got the means or infrastructure to support huge amounts of newcomers. We're lowering the standard of living for people already living here. And I do think some people would say, oh, that's absolute nonsense. I just sort of think there's got to be an element to being an island nation and England's green and pleasant land and all the rest of it. I mean, you can't just build over the whole blooming lot. And then how do we pay for all that infrastructure and all the rest of it? I just think there's got to be a point where you say we need to work out the numbers of who is coming here. It's not, and that's not to be anti-migration. It's just saying, well, don't you get to say it like Australia does?
Yes, and it all costs money, doesn't it? I mean, it's £6 million, £7 million a day being spent on hotels at the moment. I mean, many would say it's just not cost-effective. Nicola from Norwich has been in touch saying Macron is laughing all the way to the bank. Why on earth would he want to stop the small boats leaving his country? It's a point. And for him to link this issue to being a consequence of Brexit is a total joke. He fails to mention he's having the same problem with Italy.
And Calvin says the only way to stop this nonsense is to use the Navy to turn boats around. Australia did this and the boat stopped overnight. Well, I don't know if that's true with Australia or not. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I don't know how effective the Australian policy was, so I can't comment on that. However, is there an argument to say we get Border Force or the Navy or whatever? They're not going to catch everyone. but they might catch a lot of people. They have to be sort of on the point where people aren't in British waters, otherwise you have to take them back.
It's very complicated,
because of maritime law. But if you can stop them getting into British waters...
But again, without a returns policy, can you push them back? I'm not sure you can.
I don't know. If they're still in French waters, you probably could.
But I don't think the French have agreed to take them back. I'm not sure
well, I don't
that's
know.
currently in place. And one more from Anne, who says, I wish Sunak would stop hugging Macron. It feels creepy. The French must be laughing at his desperation, throwing the money while our NHS falls apart.
The body language is very interesting, because if you saw yesterday that actually Macron did this and then Sunak did it back to him, and that's all about power.
Well, it's optics, isn't it?
Yeah, you talk to the body language expert, and it's whoever's got their hand on last, because they seem to be pushing them towards the door like that. And it's that power optic thing. The Americans use it a lot.
Biden does this. If you watch all the photos, if you look now, you won't miss this now. Biden always puts his hand on top, so in the photo ops, he looks like he's got the power.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
You won't miss it now.
No wonder she did it to me. I know who's in control of this
I'm always
show.
doing this to you, aren't you?
Yeah. OK. I've got no say in anything that goes on here.
Stop
honestly.
it, no.
I just twiddle the knob that makes the words go round.
Yes.
We're talking...
Very well too.
Thank you. We're talking Six Nations with Aidan in just a couple of minutes.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Good morning. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
It is a glorious 8:21. As we've been talking about this morning, Gary Lineker is not going to be doing Match of the Day tonight, following his row with the BBC over his tweet, and he's off for the foreseeable, as far as we know.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to see how he is going to make a comeback. It could happen, but we're not sure which way. Yes, he's been asked to step back from the show tonight over those tweets. A big fallout from that as well. Lots of presenters, commentators saying they're not going to appear on the show either.
No.
It's a big story.
They're all on the picket line.
They're all on the picket line. Yeah, it doesn't look like anyone's going to cross it either, so far at least. We're joined by sports journalist Ben Jacobs with us now. I believe he's on the line. There he is. Good morning to you, Ben. So what do you make of all of this then? Have the BBC mishandled it, or have they done the right thing?
Good morning. Well, I think that the BBC thought they were diffusing the situation by trying to get Gary Lineker to stand down after he refused to apologise on air, and all it's done is added to the storm. And although the BBC will point to their impartiality rules, it feels very inconsistent and harsh on a freelance sports presenter. Of course, if Gary Lineker was a news presenter, it would be very different. But ultimately, he tweeted from a personal account without any reference to the BBC or Match of the Day. And even though he is one of their highest paid presenters and affiliated and known as part of the BBC team, he took a personal opinion on a personal account. And one wonders if he had taken the opposite opinion and agreed with the asylum policy, whether or not there would be any kind of fuss, but that would still be a breach of these so-called rules. So at the heart of this, two things. One is perhaps inconsistency, because let's not forget, we have people like the BBC chairman, Richard Sharp, who facilitated a loan for the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. There are others we can point to, like Jeremy
hold
Clarkson,
on, Ben. Ben, hold on a minute. You talk about inconsistency. The inconsistency is what's happening now, isn't it? Tim Davie, the Director General, said in 2020 he wanted to crack down on staff posting their view. Now, I know Lineker's freelance, but that's by the by. He wants to crack down on BBC people posting their views on social media in a move to restore the view of the BBC as impartial. Anybody else working within the BBC can't spout away on social media and get away with it. So the inconsistency is that Gary Lineker's been given a free pass until now.
Well, I think that he hasn't been given a free pass. What you find is the more prominent accounts that you have, the more visible they are. And you're absolutely right in what you say, that if there is a blanket and relatively militant policy that nobody can do anything, then the BBC should be policing that day in, day out with everybody. But let's not forget, Davie himself spent many years standing as a local councillor, being part of the Conservative Party. Richard Sharp, as I say, facilitated that loan for Boris Johnson. Jeremy Clarkson had very controversial views on social media when he was at the BBC. And this is not a now problem, as you rightly say. Tim Davie's made impartiality his platform for a good couple of years now. But I think the challenge with Lineker in particular is just that he's freelance, and I do think that's significant, and he is a sports presenter. And it very much feels like if the view was the opposite and he'd simply agreed with a tweet, even though that would be exactly the same, a view on politics, he would still be on Match of the Day. And the final thing I would say...
Again, forgive me, Ben, for interrupting, and I'm jumping in. But it's not just about what he said. He said things like this before. It's not about what he said, it's about the way in which he said it, isn't it? He referred to this being similar to 1930s Germany. Now, that's the problem with this tweet, isn't it?
I think the words on Germany were definitely poorly judged for sure, but the BBC would need to come out and specifically say that he's not been taken off Match of the Day because he's been impartial. He's been taken off Match of the Day because he made an analogy with Germany in the 1930s. And if they extend their logic to that, then absolutely it shifts away from just he took a political view and it becomes inappropriate language. And we may see Gary Lineker return to Match of the Day and apologise for the language, but not necessarily the view. But I think when I say impartiality, I want to make it clear why I believe that. And the reason is because if we stick with only Gary Lineker, he was allowed with BBC approval to start the 2022 World Cup, stating that human rights in Qatar needed to come under scrutiny. Then flash forward to this statement, and it very clearly says that Lineker should not be engaging in either political views or political controversy, and Qatar is ultimately a political controversy. So why was he allowed to go on air in endorsed capacity and attack Qatar, whether you believe him or not, but he's not allowed to take a view around British politics? That is the hypocrisy and the inconsistency.
OK, Ben, thanks very much indeed. Good to talk to you this morning. We've had a statement, haven't we, from former DG Greg Dyke?
Yes, he's been speaking to the BBC this morning. He says, I think what the BBC did yesterday was mistaken. Over the years, I've never gone public criticising the leadership of the BBC because I know what a difficult job it is. But he does think the precedent in the BBC is that news and current affairs employees are expected to be impartial and not the rest. He says Gary Lineker is a much-loved football reporter and presenter, but if you start applying those rules to everybody who works with BBC, where does it end? And he mentions David Attenborough and Sir Alan Sugar. So two people that we know their political views. They're often outspoken about political issues. With David Attenborough, it's about the environment. Where is the line? It is a point, isn't it?
Yeah. Fascinating, though, in all of this.
What's fascinating is how big it's got, hasn't it?
It's got huge.
It really has.
It's got huge. But it's worth pointing out that Match of the Day isn't going to be worth watching tonight because there's no presenters, no specific commentators, no nothing. But what you will have is alternative Match of the Day here on GB News with... I've forgotten who's
Star-studded lineup. Mark Dolan is
Mark Dolan. That is your man. Mark Dolan.
Pundits, which is more than the BBC have got today.
Yeah, all 10 o'clock tonight here on GB News, so you don't want to miss that. Aidan's going to be tuning into that, aren't you, Aidan?
Yeah, without doubt, yeah.
You're going to be on it, probably.
No, I haven't had a call yet, I must admit.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure
the phone's on. The phone's on if
You're going to be very busy today, aren't you, Aidan?
I would have thought so, yeah. I'm going to QPR later on as well, so I'm right in the middle of watching a game as well, so eating, sleeping and breathing it today.
Yeah, you are. What's happening with all the sport this morning?
Well, look, it always ends well when sport mixes with politics, doesn't it? But I've been saying it for a long time. But no, it's a big weekend of rugby this weekend. We've got 2:15 this afternoon, Italy against Wales. Wales have lost all 3 matches so far in the Six Nations, and so they'll be looking to avoid the wooden spoon effect. They've had a really difficult few months as well, the Welsh Rugby Union. They've had that dispute over contracts that we discussed on here a couple of weeks ago. Then there was all the accusations about what was going on, the culture at the union as well, and their misogynistic comments, all the rest of it. And so the team haven't... Well, they can tell the players have been in a contract dispute with the organisation because the results on the pitch have been terrible. They lost to England last time out. But they play Italy today. They've only got 1 point. Traditionally, they're the team that finish. They're the whipping boys, and they've got a chance to win today. And then England play France this afternoon, the first really big test of England's Six Nations to see how far they come.
Up to it, do you think?
Well, look, I mean, we don't know. That's the simple answer. But if we look at it from the very beginning, they like to make a statement, a mission from the squad. I always remember when Steve McLaren took over the England job, first thing he did to make a statement and stamp his authority on the role was to drop David Beckham. Big thing. This time, Manu Tuilagi was the man who was sacrificed by Steve Borthwick, and he's gone and got rid of his captain this week as well, Owen Farrell. Yeah. He's not happy with the levels he's been reaching in the first few games. Look, I think that tells me that this tournament is experimental for England because I don't think there's any doubt that Owen Farrell will return. He's the captain after all. But it does mean a place for Marcus Smith, who wasn't really trusted under the previous coach, Eddie Jones. And it also brings into focus England being back at Twickenham as well. We touched on this yesterday, didn't we? Sir Clive Woodward said
World's biggest pub.
Yeah, exactly. Because unlike in football, you can drink alcohol within view of the pitch. And he thinks that too many fans are just leaving their seat during the play and going to get a drink, go and get refreshments, and so that detracts from the support that the fans are offering the team on the day. And when you're at home...
The match was a bit more exciting. They wouldn't leave, would they?
Well, maybe they just expect England to win. That's how they've got. England have been very successful over the last 25 years. So that's maybe how they are. But France, 1 defeat in 16. They can still win the Six Nations. And, of course, we've got Scotland and Ireland tomorrow.
Yeah.
And how are England looking ahead of this afternoon?
I would say, look, I mean, they had a bad start, obviously losing against Scotland. So when they lose to Scotland, they also lose the Calcutta Cup. Scotland have had the Indian sign over them in recent fixtures, recent meetings between the two countries. But they picked things up since then. I wouldn't say that they played Italy and Wales since then, so they would be the two weakest teams in the Six Nations. So today will give us a real pointer as to how far they've come. I honestly think this is experimental. I think Borthwick is looking at the World Cup further down the line. Having said that, even allowing for that, Ireland, #1 in the world. France, as I say, one defeat in 16, probably favourites to the World Cup. We'll get a better idea this afternoon.
Lovely stuff. Aidan, thank you very much indeed. Catch up with you a little bit later on.
Did you see yesterday, Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron, they actually traded, apparently, shirts ahead of this game this afternoon.
Oh, did
French
they?
and English shirts.
Oh, right. Oh,
yeah, signed ones, apparently.
Oh, right.
It's a bromance.
It is a bromance.
Even trading football shirts.
It sort of does. I don't know. There's something about it. Because France was so difficult over Brexit, the bromance seems, in a way, a little bit distasteful. But if you're going to get anything done, you've got to get on with people. Otherwise, you're just never going to get anywhere.
Do you think it's genuine, or do you think it's forced?
I think it's probably a bit of both, 50-50. Yeah. 50-50. Diplomacy is always a bit of 50-50 like that, isn't it?
Yeah. Good answer.
Oh, well, thank you very much indeed, Miss Costello.
Very good.
I appreciate that. Now, we're going to talk... we're going to go through the papers in a couple of minutes, and then we're going to be talking dogs. Have you got a pug? Because the pug's another flat-faced breed, very popular, but are they healthy? There is a real concern. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts of
Moss?
rooms. Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Oh, we should really broadcast what we do in the commercial breaks because the chit-chat in here is amazing.
It is, yeah.
I think we should put it out on the radio in the break, so
Yeah.
you get tuned into the radio and we'll put it out. Anyway,
We could call it like kind of like a behind-the-scenes podcast or something. It would be good like that, wouldn't it? We just have a right old gossip.
Yeah, you're a right old gossip and a good laugh. Anyway, it's 8:36 morning to you. Let's have a look at the papers. We'll start with the Express. Rishi Sunak's £478 million deal with France to end the small boat crisis.
Similarly, The Independent questions what Britain is getting by handing France £500 million to solve the small boats crisis.
The Times has support from fellow presenters who won't work on Match of the Day tonight following Gary Lineker's suspension.
And the Daily Mail also reporting on Gary Lineker's suspension, claiming one source to describe the presenter's mutiny as a proper BBC crisis.
OK, let's go through the papers with political editor for HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield, and assistant editor for The Spectator, Cindy Yu. Good morning to both of you. Kevin, let's kick off with the Express, should we? And voter ID and the elderly.
Yes, I mean, this is an issue, I think, that's kind of flown under the radar a little bit, and I think it could potentially be a big political controversy. So from the local elections in May, the rules are changing so that you can't vote unless you produce picture ID,
right?
Which at the moment you don't have to. Now, the Express are making the point here that around about 1 million, so 2 million voters, they reckon, in total don't have the required photo ID right now, of which about half of them are elderly voters and who could effectively be disenfranchised if you turn up and don't have...
But you can get free appropriate ID from the government.
You
for
can,
this,
I think, but I think you have to, the take-up has been really poor. I think it's just 50,000 maybe from memory. It's a tiny percentage of the total who actually need it. And potentially, you know, as I say, this could be quite a big thing. Now, Labour say that it's disenfranchising a lot of people who would be more likely to vote for Labour. However, a lot of elderly voters are Conservative voters, so it could just as easily damage the Tories as well. And I think, you know, I think you could potentially see quite a few people turning up completely unaware of it and being turned away from the voting booth, which isn't great.
Well, you're being told now. You're being told now.
I think it's important that people are aware of it.
But it does need to be out there, yeah. It just needs
to be out there. So if you can get online or get someone, if you fall within that category, if you can get online or get someone you know, child or grandchild or whatever, to get online for you, you can fill out forms and then get government ID, which will work at the polling station. Because you've got to have your... I really think everyone should vote.
Yes.
I'm all for that, actually.
Cindy, let's take a look at The Guardian, shall we? And this is all about post-Grenfell building work, isn't it?
Yeah, so Michael Gove has been beavering away at this, and, you know, he's seen as someone who just solves problems in government, and he's been given this kind of cladding issue, which is really intractable to solve. And the way he's solving it is just to make house builders sign this contract by Monday. They did have longer notice.
Right.
And if they don't sign this contract, which accepts liability for any life-critical responsibility, so bad cladding, then they don't get to continue developing their buildings, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do. But this story in The Guardian is saying that actually, because of paperwork hold-ups in the civil service, there are only a handful of developers who have signed this. So I think, you know, Michael Gove will really have to, you know, put the law down on this one.
Yeah.
Because the
well, it only seems
situation,
reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have colleagues who are stuck in this situation, and the problem is that, you know, when you buy something like that, the company you're buying it for don't take any responsibility.
Yeah.
And you as a leaseholder have to foot all of the bill, which is particularly hard if you're in a high-rise, which often these are. So we need something to solve it, and I think Michael Gove probably is doing the right thing, and I think house builders really need to be mindful that we don't have another Grenfell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kevin, let's talk money, should we? In the Mirror this morning, BP making loads of money under the current crisis. The boss has... Was he had a 50% pay rise, or an extra £3 million this year or something?
Yeah, he's had a £10 million pay and perks bonanza, as the Daily Mirror describe it. It's 300 times the average UK workers' pay. Now, obviously, the context is that BP's profits soared to more than double to £23.4 billion last year. So Bernard Looney, as the boss, I guess, will be on a performance-related package. So that'll be why he's got it. But I just think it will stick in the throat of people who are having to pay through the nose extra for their bills. And also, you know, these profits are largely based on factors that are out with the company's control. It's basically the wholesale price has gone up. So it logically follows that their profits will also go up. And he's raking it in. And I just think it will really
the argument is, and it's a bit difficult to argue against it in a way, but the argument is that there has been not that long ago, actually, these companies were making very little money, or indeed losses, actually. And no one was saying, well, let's bail them out. Yeah. So when they start to make huge profits, why do we then say, well, you need to bail us out?
Yeah, I think there's a real question over principle here. What is taxation for? And if you think that the government can just levy one-off taxes, then taxation really does become much more like, you know, ad hoc. You know, if you make too much profit, the government can just take it away from you on like an ad hoc basis. So that's one question on principles. But also, you know, recently, actually, Harbour Group, which is one of the leading companies doing oil and sea extraction, they have said that they're going to take investment abroad because all of their profits have been wiped out by the windfall tax that Rishi Sunak introduced. So it's difficult balance to get right, I think, because you don't want to discourage that kind of investment in the UK.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Cindy, let's stay with you, shall we? This is a story in the Times about low traffic zones. We're talking about these a lot at the moment, but this is about inaccurate data.
Yeah, this is one of my biggest bugbears because my street has just been turned into a low traffic zone.
Like a ULEZ sort of thing?
I was not consulted about it, but I can see, so I'm on a corner flat, and I can see on the main road, which is one side of my window, all of the cars building up, especially in the mornings and the evenings, all the way down, you know, you can feel the fumes kind of there. And on the other window, nothing at all. And so all of these zones have been introduced, and this article is saying that possibly based on flawed data, these trackers are automatically meant to be tracking how what the impact on traffic is, have actually said that actually any vehicles going stop-start or under 6 miles an hour might not be recorded at all.
Right.
So they've been underestimating the impact on traffic on the main roads, leading to people saying that this LTNs are a success, which I think anyone who lives near any of these LTNs can see that they're not.
Yeah. We had them in our area a couple of years ago. They were brought in, no consultation, as far as we could tell anyway, and our street, basically at either end, was pretty much blocked off.
Yeah.
And it really caused huge discord amongst just people living in the street. People were in favour of it, people were against it. It was really quite nasty. And eventually the council decided to rip it all out. But it obviously cost a lot of money to install, and it obviously cost more money to take it out as well. So is
it just a London thing, this LTN?
As far as I know,
I think so. Yeah, I don't think. But it's one of those things. It's like you could see it maybe starting in London and other councils then following on. You know, so it's something that could happen elsewhere as well.
But like you say, they haven't been popular. I think it's fair to say. I mean, there's a lot of stories out there at the moment about the death of the high street. I mean, if it isn't struggling enough, you introduce an LTN, and you know the shops that find themselves in that zone, there's quite simply no traffic going past.
Yeah, absolutely right.
People aren't stopping.
There was one little kind of a corner shop, a convenience store near us, and absolutely overnight, basically the footfall, the passing traffic just stopped past their shops. Obviously, they were unhappy about it. And what it did as well was it diverted a lot of the traffic onto main roads, which, you know, with flats and what have you, and it just basically choked up those roads. One of them went past a school, not great for all those fumes outside the school and what have you.
I'm saying if they're going less than 6 miles an hour, they won't be. The sensors say it's an empty road.
Most London traffic.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, let's have a look. I love this one in the Express. See yours, Cindy. Somebody, I don't know who, wants to pay us to go and live in the Alps for 10 years.
Yes, unfortunately, not us, because you have to be a Swiss citizen.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, sorry about that, Stephen. But, yes, paid £50,000, and it depends on a family of 4. So if you're adult, you get 22k. For every child, you get 10k. But the problem with this, and this Swiss village has had depopulation, basically. People have left the village, gone to cities, all that sort of stuff. So you've only got hundreds of people living there, and I can see why they want to boost that with young families. But you get that £50,000, but if you move away within 10 years, you have to pay that money back.
Right. Right.
So it's a bit of a 10-year contract there, or a sentence. To take the money, you go live there, you can't leave within 10 years.
It can't be a sentence. It must be a lovely thing. I mean, it must be beautiful.
It looks
if you can get a
lovely.
job, that's the thing.
You'd have to work remotely, wouldn't you, unless you wanted to...
Yeah. I mean, the question is, why do people move away? Clearly there were reasons for that. So, yeah.
I still think it sounds idyllic.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
It'd be nice if you
Do
could...
it, Kevin?
You'd retire there.
You need to have to suss the place out, but it sounds nice.
But they're
It
only
sounds
looking for
nice.
under 45s.
Oh, are they?
So they want young families.
Oh, sorry,
right.
Stephen, that's me.
We're
and you.
out.
That's me and you done.
Yeah, we're
Ageism.
finished. It is ageism. Can I just say, I feel offended. I'm offended, and I may sue them in the
That's the real
European
story.
Court of Human Rights. Oh, mind you, they're not in Europe, are they?
Yeah, they're not in the EU.
They're not the EU.
No.
Oh, let's blow that one out of the water then. I am offended.
Looks beautiful.
Everybody else gets offended over things, so it's my turn.
It's your turn now.
Yeah, Cindy, Kevin, it's
Kevin,
been really good to see
very
you both
much.
this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, should we talk about dogs?
No, we're going to talk about headlines, actually, because we need time to get the dogs in the studio.
Oh, right. Well, we've
I don't know if we've
also
actually
got some views as well.
Oh, yeah, because I'm just trying to find the headlines.
Yeah.
Look, have you got a dog?
My mum's got a dog. I'm quite close to her.
Oh, what's she got?
A Shiba Inu, which is a Japanese dog.
Oh, they're stunning. Very regal.
It's an orangey dog with a curly tail.
Oh, I know the ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look
nice.
They look like a fox.
Really lovely.
Yeah, very
great.
nice.
Yeah, very, very
There
nice.
you go, that sounds lovely. There you go, thanks very much indeed. OK, let's bring you up to date then with some of the headlines this morning.
And junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary didn't attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned 3-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors voted to take industrial action over demands for a 35% pay rise.
The SNP leadership candidate Humza Yousaf says he was forced to call police over abuse he experienced in the early days of his campaign. He's currently the Health Secretary in Scotland. He's vying to replace Nicola Sturgeon and to become the first leader of Scotland from an ethnic minority background. This revelation comes ahead of the party's 7th leadership hustings taking place in Glasgow this afternoon.
And Silicon Valley Bank UK says it will be put into insolvency from Sunday evening. The announcement comes after Silicon Valley Bank in the US was placed under government control yesterday. The Bank of England said it will stop the UK branch from making payments or accepting deposits.
Now, the RSPCA has called for a ban on flat-faced dogs from competing at Crofts.
Yes, the charity is highlighting concerns that flat-faced dog breeds can suffer terrible issues that stop them from living normal lives.
Well, let's talk to vet and TikTok star Ben Simpson-Vernon, who's here. Good to see you once again. Nice to have you back in.
Morning.
Look, there's
Morning.
been controversy over flat-faced dogs, and I guess pugs in particular, for a long time now, but still their popularity seems to be soaring.
Yeah, so, pugs, the last couple of years, I think the registration statistics of the pugs are starting to drop off a little bit, but French Bulldogs and Bulldogs are, as popular as ever. I think generally there's a little bit more awareness of the sort of health issues they have, but, not really seeing much of a wane in their popularity.
So what kind of things are we talking about here? What issues are flat-faced dogs experiencing?
So, the main issues are in relation to their breathing. So these dogs obviously have a flatter and wider skull, but still the similar amount of soft tissue in their head. So essentially all that soft tissue is just crammed into this bony box, and they often have an elongated soft palate at the back of their throat, narrower nostrils, and that means that they often struggle to breathe when they're exercising, so they're often exercise intolerant, they can have issues breathing, this can cause them to regurgitate food.
There's an issue with their eyes as well. So I've heard about pugs' eyes sort of popping out and things.
Yeah, so it's the breathing issues are just the tip of the iceberg, really, because it is their eyes, so they're very vulnerable to trauma to their eyes, so developing eye ulcers, but also a lot of evidence in the last few years that very prone to skin problems, spinal problems, the majority of them have to have a caesarean to give birth. Most of them can't give birth naturally. So
is this I mean, look, if you mentioned bulldogs, I don't know what the issue is French bulldogs. English bulldogs they're a sort of natural breed, aren't they? Is there an issue with a lot of these dogs being bred to be more flat-faced?
I mean, essentially, they've become more and more extreme over the years. So, bulldogs were originally bred to bait bulls, and so they were more athletic dogs. Bulldogs of today, most of them, a lot of them would struggle with a run in the park. So they've just become more extreme over the years.
I think a part of the issue, especially with these kind of breeds, for pugs and for bulldogs, they're so popular, aren't they? It's a celebrity dog. We see them all over the press, don't we? That's perhaps one of the reasons why people want them so much and why there is that demand. But do you think that people aren't so aware of these health issues and perhaps what comes with it? Vet bills, for example, could be much higher if you have these breeds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I say, I think there's a little bit more awareness. But if you look up insurance quotes for these dog breeds, they're astronomical. I mean, you can quadruple what it would be for a lot of other dog breeds because of their health issues. So, and it can be very distressing if you have one of these dogs and they become seriously ill. I've seen quite a few French bulldogs, 2-3 years old, become paralysed with slip discs. It's really not uncommon. People end up with bills of thousands of pounds, and some people just can't pay that.
It's part of the issue then, and it's not to criticise anyone who's got one of these dogs at the moment, but is there a sense that we have bred dogs for our benefit and not their health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love these dogs. I totally get why people get these dogs. They have, often really calm temperament. But I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. A lot of people have some awareness of these issues, but people it's just so normalised, essentially.
What can people do if there's pug owners and bulldog owners who are watching and listening now? Is there any tips that you've got to keep their dog as healthy as possible?
So one of the most important things is keeping them slim. So if they're overweight, they're much more likely to have some of the breathing issues. And it's always best to, the earliest sign of a problem. So if they're breathing very noisily when they're exercising, anything like that, go to your vet, speak to them and see whether there's anything that can be done to help. And some of these dogs do need surgery to help open up their airways. Quite invasive surgery, but it's a big help for some of these dogs.
But it's awareness. I mean, because I know you've got a dog, haven't you? Am I right in thinking you've got a dog?
I don't actually have a dog. No, at the moment I've got an 18-month-old at home.
That's
another son another child on the way.
I knew you had something.
Yeah, at the moment, but one day I will. But yeah,
because I know you are a dog lover.
Oh well, yeah,
aren't you?
Yeah.
So do we need to retrain ourselves into what we are choosing? I mean, I'm a cat lover, and my sort of golden rule is rescue cat. It's got to be a rescue. You couldn't do it with any old thing. As long as you love it, then it's fine. Do we need to move away from people saying, "Oh, I really want this dog because of how it looks and because of it's a whole style thing, isn't it?"
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone, people obviously want a dog that's going to suit their lifestyle, that has a nice temperament, but I think we need to have health much higher up the priority list when people are picking dogs, and unfortunately these flat-faced breeds are a comparatively low health dog.
I should just ask you very briefly, because we're almost out of time. The call is from Peter Petter to ban these from cross. Would that make a difference, just very briefly?
I think it would help to just reduce their visibility. The more images we see of these dogs, the more normalised and it is, to own these dogs. So,
Okay. Really good to see you, Ben, as always. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
Coming up, all the top stories for you, everything about Gary Lineker, of course. But here's your weather.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. It will be turning milder this weekend, but it's cold out there this morning. Potentially pretty icy as well, especially where we've had some snow. The culprit for that snow, this area of low pressure, has now cleared away. Weather fronts are trying to push in from the west, but for most places, it's a dry, sunny start, but it is frosty out there. Now, this weather front is providing dull and damp conditions in the southwest. Mostly rain here, but some snow over the moors. And as that wet weather creeps into parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, here too, a little bit of snow is likely during the day. Again, mostly over hills, however. For much of northern and eastern England and most of Scotland, it'll be a fine, bright day with sunny spells, but it is cold. Temperatures 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8, perhaps in 1 or 2 spots. It is turning milder, though, in the southwest, and that is a sign of things to come. But the cold air still in place over northern England and Scotland. So as this wet weather comes in later today, parts of the Midlands too, we are going to see some snowfall. Not lasting too long, but it could cause some further disruptions spreading into Scotland through the night. Slippery conditions on the roads. So, yes, the Met Office do have another warning in place. It won't be as cold tomorrow morning as it is this morning. Most places staying above freezing, but still cold enough for sleet and snow to be falling first thing across northern Scotland. For a good part of England and Wales, tomorrow's a dry and a bright day. Again, some sunshine around before things cloud over. Rain will push into Northern Ireland and Scotland, and it will mostly be rain at this stage, just some snow on the tops of the mountains, because it's turning milder by the end of the day, double digits almost across the board. The cold air still in place across northern Scotland, but elsewhere turning much, much milder. Could be into the teens by the end of Sunday. At the same time, another weather system comes in, bringing wet weather on Sunday night. But although it's turning milder this weekend, look at this. The blues and the cold air return next week.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Gary Lineker is sidelined from Match of the Day in a row over impartiality.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock on Saturday, the 11th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
So your top stories this morning, and the BBC has suspended Gary Lineker from Match of the Day after criticising the government's asylum policies with references to 1930s Germany. The programme will air without a presenter or pundits or commentators, as they all say they stand in solidarity with Lineker.
The UK is to fund a new detention centre in France to tackle small boat channel crossings. The Prime Minister and the French President have agreed to a £480 million payout over the next 3 years to help the ongoing crisis.
At 9:20, we're talking to the actress Sue Holderness. You'll know her better as Marlene, of course, from Only Fools and Horses. She's trying to work to tackle fraud amongst the over 65. She's been a victim, and she doesn't want you to be.
And as ever, you can join in any of our discussions this morning by emailing gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. Now to our top story, and Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day tonight following his row with the BBC over his politicised tweets.
Now, the broadcaster says he won't present the programme until they've reached an agreed and clear position over his use of social media.
Well, the announcement was followed by fellow pundits Ian Wright and Alan Shearer saying they also would not appear on tonight's programme in solidarity with Lineker.
Well, let's talk to Jack Carson, who's outside Broadcasting House for us this morning. It's not going to be much of a show, is it, Jack?
Well, that's what we're trying to work out at the minute, Stephen, because the changes in the last 24 hours have been so dramatic and happened so quickly. It was yesterday afternoon when, as usual, they were planning the show with the idea that Gary Lineker would still host, but it's thought that within the BBC hierarchy, bosses above BBC Sport wanted to have Gary Lineker make a full public apology and announcement, which he then decided he wouldn't do it, and after speaking with those bosses, said he would take a step back. The BBC announcing that he would take a step back from presenting duties on Match of the Day until they could reach an agreement between them. And then that's when he started to inform fellow presenters, pundits, who then started to come out in solidarity with him. Presenters such as Mark Chapman, who usually presents Match of the Day 2 on a Sunday, so we're unsure what the programme tomorrow is going to look like for the Sunday football highlights. But pundits such as Alex Scott, Ian Wright, Mika Richards, Alan Shearer, of course, all saying they would not take part in any of the programmes. So the BBC announced that it would have an episode essentially of Match of the Day with just highlights, with no presenting or punditry in between. A very unprecedented move. But then the issue came with commentators, and Steve Wilson, who's the lead commentator for BBC Sport, announcing a statement on behalf of all the others, saying that as commentators on Match of the Day, we've decided to take a step down from tomorrow night's broadcast. We are comforted that football fans who want to watch their teams should still be able to do so, as management can use world feed commentary if they wish. And so what that programme tonight is going to look like is still very much up in the air. But the problem does go further than that, as 36 Tory MPs, part of the Common Sense group led by Sir John Hayes, say that they are demanding a full apology from Gary Lineker as well. But for media duties which players complete after the game, it's thought that many players are going to the Professional Football Association saying that they want to boycott BBC interviews after the game today.
Jack Carson, thank you for bringing us up to speed there outside BBC Broadcasting House in London. And I'm pleased to say we're joined now by former Head of Religion and Ethics at the BBC, Akhil Ahmed. Akhil, great to have you with us. Good morning to you. I'm fascinated to hear your perspective on this as a former boss at the BBC. Do you think the BBC have handled this correctly, asking Gary Lineker to step aside for tonight's show?
Well, I'm speaking today in a purely personal capacity, not representing anybody I work for right now, but I would say I think they're in a difficult decision. They made a difficult decision. Whether it's the right thing or not, only they can tell. What you've seen there with that report from Jake is that obviously a lot of people disagree with what they've suggested, simply because many people would point to the hypocrisy of that particular decision, and also point to the fact that Gary is a sports presenter. His views are pretty well known anyway with regards to this and many other particular kind of subjects. He's not a news and current affairs presenter. And is he entitled to have an opinion as a freelance employee, not a full-time employee? Can the BBC really, or any employer, really police somebody who has a job which is actually only a part-time job? He's a freelancer. And so this opens up a whole load of issues. And I can understand the BBC wanting to get to the bottom of it. My question would only be, actually, did they really understand the makeup of how people operate these days? Gary is effectively has a portfolio career. He has a number of employers, and so can the BBC really impose its particular perspective on social media policy on somebody who is a freelancer as opposed to somebody who's a full-time worker? So I actually think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered here. And I think what it does is show you that the nature of how we work has changed radically.
Yeah, Akil, is the freelancer a bit of a red herring, though, in the sense that you know how it works in this business? You can be classed as a freelancer because a lot of presenters are employed on separate contracts, so it'll be on a freelance contract. That's all to do with tax and how you manage it, and whether he's employed as himself or whether he's employed as a broadcasting company. And it's all complex, but it's in effect he's one of the BBC's highest paid stars. If not the highest paid.
Yeah.
Therefore, the fact whether he's got on a freelance contract or a staff contract is sort of neither here nor there.
No, I would agree with you generally, but I think on this one it doesn't. That's not the case, because he does work for other employers. He actually has. If you follow football globally, for that matter, you'll know Gary Lineker from other broadcasters that he works for. For many years he presented the Champions League coverage for BT Sport. He does work for other broadcasters, so I understand. I know exactly what you're on about. I actually was interviewed by HMRC when this first broke as a story a few years ago, so I understand that, having been an employer of people. But I think in this one, he really is a freelancer. Now, a lot of us are freelancers who work for many different organisations, and actually, what this does is throw up that interesting argument: has he broken? If he was a full-time member of staff at the BBC, I think there would be a completely different conversation. This is not me dismissing it and saying it's a storm in a teacup. This is me saying it's complicated because of the nature of his contract and the fact that he's not actually a news and current affairs presenter. When, if we worked in news and current affairs like all of us have here, the standards are very, very different than they are for somebody else. And I think we've lost sight of that, because we do have people associated with news and current affairs who do have strong views.
So, Akil, do you think
they're allowed to have those strong views as well? So why a sports presenter is not allowed to have them, I think, is quite interesting.
Akil, that's really interesting that you say that, because do you think a distinction does need to be made between what sort of presenting you do at the BBC? I wanted to get your reaction to the former Director General of the BBC, Greg Dyke. He's been speaking this morning. He says that what he thinks the BBC did with Gary Lineker in asking him to step aside off Match of the Day tonight, they said was a mistake. And he goes on to say that Gary Lineker is a much-loved football reporter and presenter, but if you start applying those rules to everybody who works at the BBC, where does it end? And he mentions Sir Alan Sugar and David Attenborough as well, who both make political comments, whether that's about a political party or about the environment. So do you think that's where the distinction needs to be made? Is that where the BBC needs to move with this? In terms of social media policy, perhaps there needs to be a distinction between whether you're a news presenter or something else.
Absolutely agree with that comment. I mean, you do have to have a distinction. I mean, I think it depends on what you say as well, doesn't it, really? Because the amount of that you can still bring the BBC into disrepute depending on what you say. Your views can be so abhorrent that actually it doesn't matter if you're a sports presenter. But I think on this thing, where you're having a political opinion where there is no, I think it's not. I think I agree completely with what Greg says. I also understand the argument. A lot of people are throwing around about So Lord Sugar. I mean, Lord Sugar said some pretty full-on things, which you would argue would get you into a lot of trouble, and actually doesn't seem to have the same kind of traction that this has. So I do think that this has been politicised. I do think that the BBC management, maybe if they could have their time again, may think differently. But I do think this does go back to what Greg says, what I've been saying, what many other people have been saying, which is the world of work has changed. And it's difficult for an organisation like the BBC, which has had a standard way of operating for some time, and it is trying to be flexible. But I think it has to change radically. And we also have to change what we think about the BBC as well, because we think if you're the highest paid presenter, does that make you ultimately the face of the BBC? Some would argue yes. But actually, if it's not your only form of employment, then is it fair to actually hold you to the same kind of standards as somebody who is on a full-time contract at the BBC? And that's the thing that we need to nail down on. And actually, if that's what the BBC is going to sort out, then how long will Gary Lineker be off air for? Because that might take quite a while. And will Gary and all the other presenters and the commentators, will they be back next week?
Yeah.
I don't think he's not going to apologise, is he? So what's going to happen? This will have to be done very, very quickly. So they may have got themselves into a very difficult situation.
But it's interesting because you know how this works, Akil, in terms of a wider organisation and the rank and file, if you like, and nothing creates problems within a newsroom and within an organisation if you've got someone who is paid an awful lot of money and as a result is a freelance contract and all the rest of it, who seems to be operating within an entirely different set of rules of those rank and file people. I mean, we're getting reports of some people at the BBC, staff members, being very unhappy with how Gary Lineker is treated, that he seems to be working on a different set of rules and principles. That has also got to be considered by the BBC, hasn't it?
It has, but then again, a lot of the rank and file, and I can put myself in that when I was there, were very unhappy with other individuals as well being allowed to get away with lots of things. So that's always going to be the case. I think you have to understand it depends on your definition of rank and file as well. If you are on a fixed-term contract or if you're a freelancer, you may think very differently than if you're a full-time member of staff. And I know from my time there, and things may have changed a little bit, but news and radio in particular had huge amounts of members of staff who were on staff contracts, whereas in television, the vast majority of the staff are on fixed-term contracts or freelancers. So there's a very big difference even within the rank and file, as it were, of the BBC staff. But I do appreciate that, decisions that get made have huge impact on everybody who works for an organisation and for the way people interact with the organisation. And it's interesting, isn't it, that people in BBC Sport, the actual people the commentators, the presenters, the pundits, etc., they have actually said that they stand in solidarity with Gary. Not necessarily saying they agree with what he said, but they're standing in solidarity with how they feel he's been treated. And I think to be asked to stand down is actually just a fancy way for saying you've been suspended, isn't it, really? Because he hasn't agreed with the standing down of it. So he has been suspended over a tweet of an organisation that he doesn't work full-time for. It does start to say that actually, where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? Because in terms of free speech has to have certain limits depending on who you work for and what your position is. But if he tweets something on a Wednesday, and on a Wednesday he's not working for the BBC, I'm just saying this is the thing for the great minds to get their heads around. Does that bring the BBC into disrepute if he only works for the BBC on, say, Friday and Saturday?
Yeah.
Does the BBC police what he does on a Wednesday? This is the thing that has to be sorted out. Will it be sorted out by next weekend?
Well, no,
I don't know.
Not a chance. Akil, do you know what? It's really fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Raises all these points I hadn't thought of.
No,
so that's really interesting.
I could have talked to Akil all morning.
Yes, well, there you go.
Fascinating. Let us know what you think about that.
Then we'd have to turn him into a member of staff, and then we have to be very careful what he says.
That'd
I
be a
know,
whole
it's very
thing.
complicated. Anyway, match of the day is going to be a waste of time tonight, to be perfectly honest. So we've got something special for you. We've got alternative match of the day, 10 o'clock. We've got a star-studded panel. We've got a load of pundits. It's a proper football programme with Mark Dolan. So everything you need to see tonight, we'll have it for you on alternative match of the day here on GB News.
Now, the UK is to help fund a detention centre on French soil in an attempt to try and stop the flow of migrants crossing into the UK via the Channel.
It was agreed in Paris yesterday between the PM and President Macron at a summit at the Élysée Palace to try to tackle the issue.
The UK is expected to contribute £480 million in funding over the next 3 years to try and help fund the measures which are expected to be fully operational by 2026. Well, to go over that and much more, we're joined now by columnist and parliamentary sketch writer Madeleine Grant, who joins us in the studio. Good morning, Madeleine. First of all, your opinion on this summit and how you think it went, because it was significant, wasn't it? The first Anglo-French summit in 5 years, and it certainly looked very cosy. Emmanuel Macron and Rishi Sunak walking up the steps of the Elysee Palace. There was lots of back rubbing and holding of one another. The paper's calling it a bromance.
It certainly looked very romantic, didn't it? It was like, I don't know what it is about these world leaders. They can't seem to keep their hands off each other. The G7 is just kind of PDA central. But I thought, it was certainly a move in the positive direction, certainly, especially following on from the agreement reached with the EU over the Northern Ireland issue, that, that it does feel like Rishi Sunak is attempting to show to the world that, we're turning a corner in EU relations. But I really think it will amount to very little until he can kind of show to the general public what this better relationship translates to in policy terms, in tangible benefits. Because right now, it's good mood music and the rest of it, but unless it materialises into something that people actually feel, I think it will all amount to nothing.
Well, of course, what people want to feel or see is a reduction in people crossing the channel in small boats. Now, this may be a step in the right direction for that, and doing some processing and detention centres and things over in France. The question is, and it was raised by Stephen Kinnock on the programme yesterday, is it cart before the horse, in the sense that unless you've got returns agreements in place, none of this sort of works anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I wonder. I mean, obviously, we don't know the ins and outs of what they're talking about. Is this a preamble towards those kinds of agreements that will be so welcome right now? We're not really sure. I think that certainly it's something that the PM would be mad not to have tried to raise with Macron. But it was interesting because in the language used, it almost felt like the Prime Minister was promising more about what the relationship would offer than Macron. Macron was using more kind of tentative language, like, I hope to see this relationship in the future, whereas Sunak was very forcefully saying, this is a new relationship and a new dawn.
Because in some respects we're on the back foot a little bit, aren't we? Because it's not only are we this, because of Brexit, we're the smaller partner in one sense, but also we need their help to stop a problem that we're getting in our country.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a tricky one. It really is. But I just think that this is one of those issues where it has the potential to totally backfire on the government, because they have been making. Obviously, they won't be thrilled that it got completely swallowed up by the news on Gary Lineker in the headlines today. But they are trying to really, ring this bell very, very loudly. The Prime Minister made stopping the boats one of his 5 pledges at the beginning of the year. And therefore, having drawn so much attention to this policy, if it doesn't work, as previous attempts have failed, then it risks backfiring on them in a big public way just before the next general election. Yeah, which would be, politically for them, a disaster. Madeleine, really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've got brilliant news, because we've got an exclusive interview with the Chancellor of the Exchequer ahead of the budget on Wednesday. He spoke to Esther and Phil on his plans to deliver growth and tackle inflation.
What I want at all, but by the way, Liz Truss was right to say that the central question is how we deliver growth. Where I think the mini-budget was wrong was to say you can borrow to cut taxes, because that's not sustainable. That's not money that you've actually got, that's money you're borrowing. And so if we're going to cut taxes permanently, then it needs to be a tax cut that we earn through higher growth. And the first step is stability. And for stability, you need responsible public finances. And that's why we took some very difficult decisions. We did increase taxes. We actually cut spending by more than we increased taxes in the autumn statement. So it was a very, very difficult statement. What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes, because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
So there you go. I think that's fascinating, isn't it? Is he just being responsible, or is he not giving voters what they want? It's a tough line. You can see the full interview on Esther and Phil's show, which is at 10 o'clock, but they're here now. Morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
I mean, I think this is I mean, I can't wait to hear the full interview, because I just think it's absolutely fascinating pursuing that line of, you know, we need to have reasonable expectations of what the economy can deliver, protect the economy, in effect, before we start getting rewards.
I think this is such an important budget. This is what's going to set the dial. You've got the general election on its way. It's how do we get the economy moving? How do we make sure that businesses are supported? And which way is he balancing that? Phil, you were asking him who now governs the country and the Chancellor. Is it the forecast, the OBR, or is it him? And is it the demands and requests of the public and business? And that's what we were probing him on. And as Conservatives, I asked him, you know, isn't he ashamed that we've got the highest tax levels in 70 years?
It's interesting, Phil, because he's saying, you know, he wants growth. Well, yeah, I mean, we all want growth. There's a lot of people saying, well, increasing business rates from 19 to 25% is going to stunt growth, not improve it.
Yeah, and we put that very point to him, that he said he wants growth, but he's pursuing policies that seem to be leading to the exact opposite of growth, and we did challenge him on that. Look, I mean, we you know, I'm a low-tax Conservative. I believe in low taxes. It was reassuring to say that he believed it. He said he believed in that too. But we'd like to see a bit more delivery of that. And you know, the country is in huge debt still. And as Esther asked him during the interview, is that because we are under-taxing people? Well, surely not. We've got the highest tax levels on history. Or is it because we're overspending? And do we need to look at...
I was wanting him to go back to his formative sort of years and his fundamentally understanding of conservatism, because he actually is a Thatcherite. That's who inspired him to go into politics. That's who inspired him to set up a business. He talks about the sort of the big bang that it was that got our financial sector growing, and that's what he wanted to do. And if he had have ran, or if he had won, sorry, he did run for leader, if he had have won, he was wanting to take corporation tax down to 15%. Yeah. I said, so how can you have 10% higher and be content with that?
So, I mean, that's back to my, in a way, back to my initial point. If he says, you know, he says he's a low-tax Conservative, he says he wants to deliver what Phil wants to deliver, and, you know, we all pay less tax and the economy booms and all the rest of it, but he's not doing it. Now, is that fiscal responsibility? Is he saying, well, look, I know it's a vote winner, but actually I'm just being fiscally responsible at the moment?
He thinks, he's sort of, I think, slightly scarred, as most people are, by what happened to Liz Truss when she cut taxes in her budget last year, and the market said this is unaffordable and all the rest of it, and we saw all the fallout from that, both economically and politically. And I think lots of people in the government are scarred by that and are now desperate that they don't do anything that spooks the markets. And so I think we've got to a point which is you know, it's quite a worrying point in many respects, that in effect the markets are running the political narrative rather than the politicians, and Jeremy Hunt's making decisions that he knows that will not spook the markets, rather than necessarily
being bold, as we'd say,
what he genuinely would like in an ideal world to do.
And then on a total different subject, because he was the longest-serving health secretary ever, we probed him about, there was a pandemic plan in place in 2011, updated 2014, one that was agreed with the sort of the EU 27, and why did they abandon that and go to lockdown? You know, what has he got to say about that? And then obviously ask him, will we see him in the WhatsApp leaks? Will we see correspondence between him and Matt Hancock? And also, did he ever think he would be the Chancellor, and what happened when Liz Truss called him, and did he think Rishi would keep him on? So there's actually lots within the interview that we talk about.
Do you know what, I didn't give you a chance to get a word.
He's very excited about this interview.
I can sympathise with that on a regular basis.
I just find it so utterly fascinating when it's not just a political interview, is it?
No.
You get more of an insight because obviously you two know him, you work with him, and you get much more of a real sense of what is going on.
And like you say, the man
Love that.
behind the policies as well. It's really fascinating. There's lots to look forward to. It's a comprehensive interview. Esther and Phil, thanks so much. And your show's
Love
coming
it.
up at 10, isn't
10
it?
o'clock.
this morning?
Absolutely, thank you.
So make sure you don't miss that.
Love it. I'm oddly excited about
He
Jeremy
is, he's
Hunt.
very
Who
excited.
knew? Who knew? More to come, including how Marlene Sue Holderness is tackling fraud for the over 65s.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Marlene?
Yeah.
Marlene? Honestly, I love Only Fools and Horses. What a classic! I had the pleasure of doing something alongside John Challis a few years ago. He's sadly passed away now, and I got him to say Marlene for me, which, as you just do, he must get.
It's a classic.
He must have got so bored of doing it. But interestingly, Marlene herself, Sue Holderness, has spent years and years entertaining us. I mean, Only Fools. Who doesn't love it? And you just think, you know, a successful actress, doing well, and it's really brave that she's come forward to say she's been scammed. She's been scammed. Some people have scammed her. We know scams exist, and so now she's got involved in a campaign to help those over 65 avoid scams because the scoundrels are out and about doing it at every opportunity. So it's a brave thing to do, and to admit you've been a victim of this. I'm delighted that Sue Holderness joins us now. It's really good to see you this morning. What happened to you, Sue? How did you fall into this trap?
Well, the thing is, I panicked. I felt stupid. These people, I was on this laptop that I'm talking to you on now, and there was suddenly this very loud alarm, a bit like an ambulance alarm. And on the screen it said, "Emergency, do not touch any device, call this number now, you are being hacked." Words to that effect. So I called the number immediately. And he kept telling me things to do on the laptop. Still the alarm noise went on. And he said, "Don't worry, madam, I'll take over your computer." And I did whatever you do to let them do that. So he took over my computer. For about a quarter of an hour, I watched the screen doing things. And then eventually he said, "It's all fine now, madam. You're completely safe for at least a year." And I said, "Thank you so much. How much do I owe you?" And I gave him, I think, £68. That didn't seem too bad, and it did solve the problem. But exactly a year later, the same thing happened. And of course, I trusted them. And then I gave them much more money. They said they were going to give me 5 years protection. I got my card out. I read them the number. I read them the expiry date. I read them the security code. And they took hundreds of pounds. Quite quickly, I thought, what an idiot. How stupid can you get? And the reason I did it was because I had panicked. I couldn't bear this noise. I didn't think logically. So I did get my money back because I contacted the bank and I contacted Action Fraud. But this new campaign, which is called Take 5 to Stop Fraud, which is led by UK Finance, a lot of work's gone into it. They're trying to protect everybody, but it's particularly over 65s. You know, obviously these criminals, they think pensions, savings, a bit hopeless online. They might be nervous and panic. Exactly what I did. So the message is quite simple. Take 5 to stop fraud. 3 words to hang on to. Stop, challenge, protect. Stop. Just count to 5 slowly before you make a payment or before you give away any of your information. Challenge it. Say, "I think you're a con artist." And if you don't actually say it, then just reject it, refuse it, ignore it. If you think it's a con, C-O-N, click on nothing. But if you succumb to it and you do feel you've lost money, the thing to do is to protect yourself. And the way to protect yourself is, as quickly as possible, ring your bank and ring Action Fraud. Those are the messages. Stop, challenge, protect.
So it's
and if you want a bit of fun, you go on the Take 5 to Stop Fraud website. If you want a bit of fun, you can print out a wonderful bingo game called Scam Bingo, which, if you play that, you'll all find ways of helping to keep yourself safe online.
Great idea.
So it's a really important campaign and really, really brave of you speaking. I think many people can relate to that idea of feeling stupid or feeling naive, but it's important to also give that message that you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't feel stupid when you are fallen victim to fraud. It happens to so many people, and the point is, it is so sophisticated. As you say, these scammers, they often play on the idea that somebody is panicked, and they also play on people's trust, don't they? It's just so sophisticated. It's so difficult for people to be able to tell what is fraud and what is real life.
And they are terribly clever. The most important thing is not to feel embarrassed, and in fact, very, very great deals of money have been lost by people on dating sites. And that's one of the most dangerous areas. You know, an older person, lonely, suddenly feels he's in love, and this person then suddenly needs the mortgage paid off. People have lost all their savings. And that's largely because they then feel so stupid that they don't own up in time. Don't be embarrassed. These people are clever. If you have any doubt, phone the police and phone Action Fraud.
We've got to be, I mean, I tell you what's happened with me recently is someone cloned my Instagram account and was then messaging viewers and listeners and saying, it's Stephen here, I'm raising money for Ukraine, or it might have been for Turkey, one for Turkey as well, donate here. And it just goes to show that actually you've really got, when it comes to online, you can't trust anything, can you? You've just got to be so wary.
And one of the latest things that one of the girls on Loose Women said that they had a message from their daughter saying that she was in terrible trouble. She was abroad, that she'd lost everything and needed £2,000 to get home. It was worded peculiarly and not like her daughter would have worded it. But for a moment, that mum thought, how do I get this money to my daughter? And that happens a lot, you know, trying to pull on the emotional heartstrings. But take 5 to stop it. Just take 5. Think, this is probably a con.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sure it's a message that will resonate people, and I'm really glad you've been able to come on and tell us about it. I can't let you go without just saying, obviously you'll have heard my dreadful John Challis impression at the beginning.
Do you ever get a laugh? Thank goodness.
But do you ever get bored with that, or is it just a point of joy that you have a place in the heart of the nation?
I would have gone on playing Marlene for the rest of my days. It feels very peculiar. Marlene without Boise isn't right at all, is it? But I sort of feel he's still here, and you know, we had the most wonderful time, and it is a great honour, really, that it has meant so much to people for so long. We had the Only Fools and Horses convention at the weekend, and many people said that through their lives they've had very difficult, hard times, and Only Fools and Horses has really helped. So, you know, I think John Sullivan has saved the NHS a fortune, because laughter is the best medicine.
Yeah, it is, and I tell you what, it somehow doesn't age, and it's just a classic. It's a real joy to talk to you, Sue. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
What a great message. Take 5, sit back, and especially what happened with Sue, and your computer starts yelling and flashing and all the rest of it. Shut the lid. Yeah. Shut the lid and just think, right. And if something like that happens, it's going to be a con. Just be careful.
But it is so sophisticated now. I mean, my mum's had one of those messages saying, Mum, it's me, I've lost my phone, I'm messaging on a friend's phone, please can you send me this much for a taxi? I mean, it's completely believable, kisses and everything, as though you're messaging your mum.
Yeah.
And as Sue says, it really plays on the heartstrings. Yeah. It's very sophisticated. But the message is, you're not silly if you fall victim to fraud. Go and get help, seek help. Yeah. Speak to the police, speak to Take 5, they're a great campaign group as well. It happens to the best of us.
Yeah, there you go. Now, coming up, because Match of the Day is going to be a washout tonight. They haven't got a presenter or commentators or pundits or anything. What's the point? But we've got an alternative for you. Mark Dolan's going to tell us about it in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News. Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome back. You are watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Now, Match of the Day, obviously, has got no presenter, no pundits, no commentary or anything tonight, so what's the point? So instead, we've got an alternative for you that's going to be fronted by Mark Dolan, who is insisted on working, despite whatever he tweets. Mark, good morning to you. What's happening at 10 tonight, then?
We're going to have alternative match of the day. As you know, Ellie and Stephen, we are the People's Channel, and the people need commentary, they need punditry. Match of the day clocks in at 7 million viewers a week. So if the BBC will not serve that audience, then GB News and Mark Dolan tonight are happy to step in. It's going to be the alternative match of the day. I am Gary Lineker, and to make it really feel like match of the day, GB News are going to pay me £1.3 million.
Excellent. Oh, well done, you. Look, how is this going to work then? Because is it an actual football show, or are you just talking about football? Because presumably there's a rights issue.
Absolutely. So we won't be able to show live footage of, well, not live, recorded footage of goals or anything like that. What we will have is top-level punditry. So we will have an array of political free footballers, okay? These are going to be commentators who are not interested in getting involved in government policy and understand that the British public love their footy and just want to talk about goals, goals, goals. We've got some big games: Bournemouth, Liverpool, Everton, Brentford, Tottenham Forest and Palace Man City. So look, it's going to be an all-star lineup. We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about the football. We'll try to have still photography and as many clips as we can get our hands on.
Fabulous.
Lots to look forward to, Mark. Sounds brilliant.
It does. And seeing as we've helped promote your show this morning, we want 10% of your 1.3 million for tonight, if that's all right.
It's all yours.
Fabulous. So there you go.
Deal done.
Mark, brilliant stuff. We'll see you a little bit later on. Well, a lot later on, actually. 12 hours
12
from
hours.
now.
I was worried he was going to be in the studio with us, and I thought, oh, no, it's too far in advance. 12 hours before his show.
Yeah.
Fine.
I tell you what, though, he's quite right. Because there's an audience that, and the BBC audience, of course, is the one that has to pay. We have no choice but to pay the licence fee, and they for whatever reason, whether you think the BBC's right or you think Lineker's right, they're not serving that audience.
They're not. Not tonight, at least.
No.
And will it be sorted for next week? I think that's what people are thinking.
Mark will.
Yeah.
Anyway, on top of all of that and all that hoo-ha with the BBC and Match of the Day, it's now been reported the Beeb has pulled an episode from Sir David Attenborough's new series due to fears of a political backlash.
Yes, the episode looks at the losses of nature in the UK and what has caused the declines, with bosses repeatedly worried about backlash from Tory politicians.
OK, Stephanie Tetch is here. Morning.
Morning.
So what's going on?
Oh, my gosh, the Beeb, this has been a really bad week for the Beeb.
Yeah.
You know, Gary Lineker, Sir David Attenborough,
two of the most loved presenters for the BBC, and it was only this week David Attenborough was voted Britain's most, favourite presenter. But with this new series, I know you're the best, Stephen, always. But, with this series, it's called The Wild Isles. Sir David Attenborough, he goes all over the world, but this is actually just focused on the beauty of the British Isles. And there's 5 episodes, but there's a 6th episode, which is only going to be available on the iPlayer, because it's been reported that it focuses on the destruction of nature. It focuses on topics such as rewilding, which has been quite controversial for Tories and the right-wing press. So the BBC have been forced to come out overnight to say, actually, no, this is not true. The plan was always to make it as a film that would be on the iPlayer and not be shown on TV, which is kind of raising a few eyebrows, because this is David Attenborough. All his work should always be on TV. In fact, that this 6th episode, which is the most controversial one, is now being shoved to the iPlayer. It begs to ask quite a few questions.
As a marketing strategy, if for whatever reason the company is wanting to get people away from watching on the box and watching on the iPlayer, then it's a good marketing way of doing it.
Yeah, then it can be saying, why don't you do it for all of the episodes? Why is it that the most controversial one of the series, which, would get a lot of people talking on social media, right or wrong, that you're kind of shoving it to the iPlayer? And it's just, I would love to hear what Sir David Attenborough has to say on this, because this is one of the few series that he's done which is actually based in Britain. So I think every episode, whether it's good or bad or controversial, should have been celebrated on TV.
Well, it will be the same criticism for this as we were seeing with Gary Lineker, that he is in some way being censored or restraining on his free speech. And we heard from Greg Dyke this morning, the former BBC director, who basically said, where is the line? Is it with Sir Alan Sugar? Is it with Sir David Attenborough? And that's what we're seeing here, isn't it?
Well, I just think, we all know as, people who are on TV, we should have that freedom of expression. But I think, obviously, with a corporation such as the BBC, I've worked for them previously in the past, and it's always about impartiality. And I think now we're in that kind of generation where people do want to talk about things both good and bad. Why should people be censored? And I think, with both of these situations that have arisen, the BBC are now going to have to really look at their guidelines and see how they're working with folk.
Interesting then. So we've got various unhappy stars here in the UK. We've got some unhappy stars in the States as well, with the Razzies last night.
Well, so tomorrow's all about the Oscars, and we know how all the egos are going to be on the red carpet. But the Razzies is really quite a humbling awards, because it celebrates the worst of films, whether it's performances, whether it's, cinematography. And Blonde has been voted the worst picture of the year. So this stars Ana de Armas as Marilyn Monroe. And the reason why it has been nominated for this, because they feel like they're making a mockery of Marilyn Monroe, because it's not actually a non-fiction piece. It's kind of focused, it's quite fictionalised on her life, and they feel like they've just kind of exploited her story very much so. And then also worst actor was Jared Leto. So for his performance in Morbius, which is a Marvel film, and he plays a scientist with a rare blood disease, and he mixes his blood with some vampire blood. So it's been quite controversial, the Razzies. And also Tom Hanks, I love him.
That was a shock.
Yeah, he's got worst supporting acting for his role in Elvis, as Elvis's manager.
See, I don't understand the whole Elvis thing, because it's been the plaudits, and for what's-his-face who plays Elvis.
Austin Butler,
Right. And yet, am I wrong? But I thought at the time it bombed at the box office.
It did bomb at the box office. There was all this hype around it, but when it was about getting bumps on seats in the cinemas, it didn't really do that well. I don't know why. I feel like it will do.
Brilliant.
I thought it was quite gripping as well. I think, Baz Luhrmann did a great job of it, but sometimes there's always that disconnect between moviegoers and actually what they really want to see. I think the thing about award season is we get shoved all these titles, and there's a lot of people who don't connect with them. They prefer the blockbusters or the action movies.
Yeah, it seems like Marvel things never win at the Oscars, do they? But I mean, they're the ones that get bums on seats.
I love Marvel. I love they can't do no wrong in my eyes. But yeah, I think the Razzies are quite humbling, and I think there's as we're talking about now in this segment, it's all about balance. You have to take both the good and the bad.
You do. I tell you what, we should have a night out at the Pictures.
Oh, that sounds great.
Because I love a Marvel.
I want to see a rom-com. Do you like rom-coms?
I love a rom-com. You need to take me to a rom-com.
No, I don't want a rom-com.
All day,
I want a Marvel.
I do like Marvel as well.
You might need to date us separately then.
Yeah.
Different taste in
Glam night.
Yeah, no, that'd because I've no one to go and see Marvel with.
Oh.
So that'd be...
Stephen and Stephanie night
I think that could be a night out. I want to ask you, because we were going to talk to a love age gap couple.
I'm quite excited about this.
Yeah, well, sadly, it looks like we can't get the connection.
Oh, no.
So but I wanted to ask you anyway. Yeah. Because the sort of thing for it round is Cher, who's now 76.
And dating a 37-year-old.
And she does believe in life after love.
She clearly does.
But she said if a 39-year age gap is wrong, I don't want to be right.
I think it's different with celebrities' age gaps because people always question the motives, mostly of a toy boy when he's with an older woman such as Cher, because a lot of the criticism is, what are you seeing in a woman who's 76 years old and you're a 37-year-old man? Cher's quite wealthy. She looks good for her age.
She looks great.
She looks good for her age, but you cannot deny she's almost, getting to her 80s. But, guys, it begs the question, it's OK when we see men with younger women or younger toy boys. There's no question about that. But when it's an older woman, it seems to always ruffle a few feathers. And I think now women are actually changing what it means to be 50, 60, 70. Cher does not look like a woman of 76.
Yeah.
She looks good for her age. So if she looks good and she feels good and she's managed to bag a toy boy, go Cher. At 76, if I'm not married and haven't got my husband and a toy boy wants me, I think, I'll be like, it's quite interesting.
Very much.
But I'll be aware of his motives because they are a lot of opportunists, and especially someone like Cher, she's got all that money. He's also a music producer as well, so he actually benefits from being in this relationship.
In that circle.
So, but I know this is a bit raunchy, but they're both serving each other's needs.
No, but it's fair enough. I don't know, isn't it funny? You see, I'm a bit cynical about the whole Madonna's got a much younger boyfriend. Now, but you see, isn't that interesting? You go, about that. And I think that with Cher... I don't know, I just sort of think it's Cher, it's fine.
I think it's fine with Cher, but I think Madonna's been doing it a bit too gruesome. She's had this succession of toy boy after toy boy, and with Cher, she does it in an elegant way, where Madonna, if you go on her Instagram, she's always plastering her, snogging off the face of a young boy, and she's got kids who are similar that age. At least with Cher, her children are grown up, and she keeps her relationship private, where Madonna, I feel like Madonna's chasing eternal youth at the moment.
I mean, the thing is with Cher, I mean, if you're watching on TV now, she does look about 40 years old. I mean, she does. She just doesn't age.
Well, she had a lot of work done, to be fair.
She probably has a lot of help.
Yeah.
Well, she admits it.
My worry would be what you have in common with someone who's maybe 40 years younger than you. I mean, you wouldn't even know the same references, would you? You'd be out for dinner and you'd be talking about things and be like, what? I wasn't born yet.
Well, maybe the cracks always do come in these relationships, because when they do end up breaking up in showbiz, everyone's like, oh, I told you so. What did she think it was really going to last? But there's that saying, you're only as old as you feel. Was it as old as young as you feel? And so maybe Cher doesn't feel like she's 76. Maybe she feels like a woman in her 50s or 40s. So, she's quite youthful. So
she's as old as the man you feel, in her case.
I agree with that.
Well, what's wrong with that? I just sort of think she's a woman with a lot of nous.
Yeah.
And she's been through the ringer a bit, hasn't she?
She has. She had a relationship with Sonny. And, that didn't work out. So, she wants a bit of revival.
I just sort of think good on her, but she's just sort of iconic. We were listening, oddly enough, we have a bit to get us in the mood on a Saturday morning. So, this is about quarter to 6 in the morning. We have Do You Believe in Life After Love? With it blasting out. And it means we're nice and peppy for you at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it's just a great tune.
You've got to be bright, you've got to be breezy.
You know what, life's too short. I think it's each their own, and people need to do what makes them happy. And if it's dating a man 40 years younger...
Well, why?
Different strokes for different folks. It means my husband hasn't even been born
yet. Well, there you go. You'll have to wait a while, but never mind.
Stephanie, we love you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Just wanted to bring you some breaking news,
go on,
actually.
then.
So Alex Scott, the BBC presenter, she's pulled out of presenting Football Focus today, following the BBC asking Gary Lineker to step away from Match of the Day tonight. She's already said she's not going to be presenting Match of the Day. She won't be stepping into his shoes. She's now also pulled out of presenting Football Focus. Kelly Summers has been brought in last minute to replace her for the programme. Alex Scott says she's not doing it in solidarity with Gary Lineker. That's the latest.
I don't know. You see, there's a lot of sympathy out there, and I don't know whether they should all just have the contracts cancelled because they haven't turned up. I don't know, but is that me being too harsh and too reactionary? It might well be. We've got more on this coming up. Throughout the day, of course, we'll be reminding you about our alternative match of the day, 10 o'clock tonight with Mark Dolan. That's one absolutely not to be missed. But coming up, we've got that exclusive interview with the Chancellor of the Exchequer ahead of the budget, the spring statement, whatever they call it these days, which is on Wednesday. It's going to be a budget which is going to be crucial for this country. And Jeremy Hunt's been talking exclusively to Esther and Phil. They'll bring you that full interview in a couple of minutes.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online.